Hello, everyone, and welcome to the much anticipated end of the year report of the war. Report a nice retrospective of the year 2022. Probably going to be the longest episode on record if time allows. We may have to uh, try to constrain ourselves a little because there is so much to cover. This is the most pivotal year, and depending on who you ask, in the past century up until the past 20 years. I would actually be inclined to say it's the most monumental year in a century. Now, that may draw some disagreements,
Okay.
fair enough, but that's what I'm going on the record as saying just to start the show. We are joined, of course, once again by Gio, who we are very happy to have on our
Woo!
end of
Shabbat
the year
shalom.
episode. He was very excited at the prospect of it upon the singular mention by GSP all over it, so we're glad to have him. It is regretful because of the circumstances. Now, I can't personally speak to what he's doing right now, nor would I if I did know. We weren't able to get Vile Varangian on the show this year for what probably seemed like obvious reasons. But like I said, I don't know of his whereabouts right now. He's been pretty quiet for a few months, so that's just completely up to speculation. But it would have been nice to have him. And we actually, funny enough, almost got him like the week the war started, and then that, of course, all fell apart because of course, it did. But we're very happy to be here. We have a lot of ground to cover, so without further ado, let's get right into it. So, I suppose the first real major event of this year would have to be the negotiations that took place between the U.S. and Russia just weeks before this war began. And I know GSPU were eager to talk about those, so I'll let you lead off with those.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a sense, it wasn't an event in that it wasn't a spectacle. Um, but it's important to remember because, of course, couched within this period is the unrest that happened in Kazakhstan. But not to get ahead of myself, so the negotiations began in December and carried into January. And they basically fell apart after about 10 weeks of attempts where uh, Russia was basically bargaining. The main clause of the bargain was that NATO would not expand into Ukraine and that Minsk II would be respected. And that was not something that America was ever going to agree to. And so therefore, ipso facto, neither would the EU or NATO. Um, and then we had the unrest about a week before, uh, I believe, either Putin and Biden were supposed to meet, or their uh, foreign ministers, Blinken and Lavrov, were supposed to meet. And I think right away, we all basically understood that not only was the answer no, but it was actually we're going to try to start a second war. uh,
Oh boy.
you have a big underbelly, and part of that is Kazakhstan, a country more than twice the size of Ukraine. So, and Ukraine is huge. Um, so, yes, I would say the biggest news is the negotiations, the tension that was happening then, the unrest in Kazakhstan. It was put out very quickly in 3 days, so that was kind of like a win for the Russians. I'm sure the Americans would have been very happy if, and of course, Kazakhstan got a new leader as well, a new president, Tokayev, and
Yes, and that's after
now
Nazarbayev
Kazakhstan is
stepped down.
that's right, and so that was a really big deal. Uh, Several foreigners with guns were found amongst those who participated in the riots. It's important to remember that dozens of police were killed, actually, including like a cadet school for police where like teenage boys were killed. So it was a pretty big deal. but it fell right off the radar as soon as it was
nobody
over.
knows about it.
Not at all. So I would say that was the big thing, and then of course, not to hog up the airwaves, but the next big thing was Putin announcing that Lugansk and Donetsk would be part of Russia, and then 2 days later there was fireworks. But that's where I'll leave it.
I think that's a pretty concise summary about the.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
And also the Freedom Convoy in Canada.
It was like 1,000 years ago.
It does.
Like, it seems like one of those things like you would talk about in, like, I don't know, 1980s, 1990s history. It's like talking about the Gomery Report or something like that. Like, I would say that this year is interesting because it's really, was it Stalin or Lenin that said sometimes 1,000 years can go by with nothing happening, and then
I think it was Lenin.
Yeah, it was Lenin that said, sometimes 1,000 years can go by with nothing happening, and then sometimes 1,000 years of history happens in a day or a year.
Yeah.
I think that the one major thing is that the Covidian world. Oh, can we say it on YouTube now?
I think YouTube has lifted the restrictions, and we've never really beat too much around the bush with it.
Yeah. The global biosecurity theater Covidian era, that sort of took a massive blow but not in the way that people think, though, because I think that it was truly the first year that the sort of restrictions were lifted and all the funny business was sort of not paid attention to, and people up until recently, of course, with Uber Muskenführer taking over the Heaven site, it seems that this censorship regime around it as well was lessened, and now that people are able to freely inquire into the origins of a certain medical treatment, that I believe you can still say the word on YouTube, but the fact that people are openly questioning it because of the Twitter files and so forth. But the point being is that I think the convoy was very interesting. I wrote about it at the time as one of, despite what Rachel Gilmore says, not that she says anything because she's brain dead, but despite what those she might as well just open up no, never mind, I'm not gonna insult I was gonna make a joke about OnlyFans, but she likes to take those selfies.
I don't know who this is, so if you want to just tear into this person, that's all you, but the platform is all yours. But this dispute is between you and whoever this is. I have no part of it.
Imagine a more mildly attractive redhead version of Taylor Lorenz. That's she's like the Canadian dollar store Taylor Lorenz.
I don't want to imagine that.
What are you gonna say, Constantine?
I don't want to imagine that, so I'm not going to.
She's not that bad on the eyes. Rachel Gilmore ain't that bad on the eyes. But anyways, the point being is that those people, despite what they say, the convoy was not, funded by, I don't know, I guess they're funded by some, Putler or dark American right-wing money funded by Peter Thiel, perhaps, who was also being funded by Putler. The convoy was truly, I think, one of the first grassroots populist movements in Canada. And the fact that it came out of Canada, the fact that was monumentally significant. And it really was a testament, despite the more, how shall I say it, higher degrees of deference and social conformity among the average elite. It truly was a moment, I feel, because that really was a testament to how far Trudeau was pushing the populace. And it really was a demonstration of the fact that the conditions that were presented to most people during the previous 2 years, it's like, what if that degree was then taken to the next step and saying, okay, more of life will be suspended, but now that purposeful suspension would be taken up by the people rather than by biosecurity, government health bodies. And so that was a very interesting form of protest. And of course, there was other people that predicted this. I remember even BAP saying years ago, well, basically, what if the plumbers striked? What if the water inspection people, what if Peter Nemitz organized a strike in the Las Vegas water refinery, very quickly be over without these boomers, manning the stations. But anyways, the point being is that, of course, was suppressed and crushed and financially weaponized, and the government, using all of its powers in the Emergencies Act to destroy it. And then, of course, the subsequent media demonization of people with like fake, made-up right-wing groups that don't exist, that are basically just a joke. Like, what's that one called? Starts with the D, GSP, what? Something like made up nonsense, Diagolon, I think, some like made up nonsense thing where it's like the truckers are a part of like right-wing militia terrorists, blah blah blah. Like, it's so all of that was happening, and of course the inquiry happened recently, and of course this discovery was never going to contradict what the Trudeau government was going,
and what
like,
and what that did, besides teaching us that the basic Schmittian rules, sovereign is he who is above the law, exactly. And sovereign is he who interprets the law.
Exactly.
And this hearing has done is it's paved the way for Trudeau to do something like this again.
Mm-hmm. Because it doesn't matter what he does. He has the mandate of heaven. And of course, as blackpilling as a significant portion of the Canadian population also believes he has the mandate of heaven, and we'll probably vote for him again in 2025. And so,
yeah, I mean, it has divided the country to a certain degree. Like, if you go to CBC on YouTube and you look at how
when they're not shutting off the comments,
yeah, when they're not shutting them off, it's poison, and rightly so. But
so, how's that Alberta secessionism going?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
about as well as the Texas secessionism.
Yeah. I mean, well, they did sign the sovereignty bill, but that's nothing. I mean, it's something, but it's the point being, I feel, is that when it comes to the beginning of the year, I truly think it was grassroots in the way that other social movements that happened during the previous 2 years, like the Summer of Floyd, was totally inorganic. I mean, it was basically allowed to happen. And, and we could talk about the implications of that. But I think that going forward, it's quite interesting to see that, and of course, like, the convoy petered out as soon as the war happened, obviously. But I think to start 2022 being such a pivotal year in I would say human history, I think that my general thesis, now that we're at the end of the year, is that time sort of experienced a sort of a disruption, if you will, that we've entered sort of a liminality to it, and that from here we can go from wherever. I think that despite which I think we're obviously going to talk about, despite like the Turbo American, like what I'm starting to see is sort of like the neo-conification of the dissident right. I think that the sort of like neoliberal, like end of history world order experienced immense disruptions and at least monkey wrenches during this previous year. And so many things happened. The convoy is just one of them. Now, will it happen again? Probably not. Will people be afraid to do anything? Yes. Will it happen in Canada? Probably not again, but it will happen elsewhere. It's already still happening in the Netherlands, and in France, there's big protests that the media ignores. And I think that model, in the same way that governments around the world will sort of weaponize lockdowns and so forth, as well as people will utilize the sort of same ethos of disrupting public services to protest. And I think like that cycle, that dialectic will continue. And don't think that the next thing will be like a pandemic. It will probably be, I don't know, some other form of lockdown or some other or a form of accelerating trends that were already existing and like, basically already going to take place, whether it be people being terminally online, atomization, and so forth. But then leading up into the war, that's another, I would say, and despite what people think, I mean, that's to me a big disruption in the order of things. But then of course you have this cope, like, oh no, not really. That the empire's stronger than ever. But we'll get. But I'm just rambling right now. But I think that to cap off, then yes, it was significant. In other words, even though just by talking about it, it seems that like it feels like it was a few decades ago. But really, it was like literally the beginning of the year. You know what I mean? Maybe living.
Yeah, it was literally like 11 or 12 months ago.
Yeah.
Oh
And
no, I know
in
some.
typical Canadian fashion, like the utter idiocy of doing it in the middle of winter. Like I don't know if people know, like if you're familiar with Southern Ontario, like technically Ottawa is in Southern Ontario, but Ottawa is on another level.
Yeah.
Ottawa during the winter is a lot more like Northern Ontario, not
Oh yeah.
Southern Ontario.
It's like Thunder
It
Bay
is
as opposed to here in Niagara. Yeah.
right. It is very cold. You know what? I should pull back on that because you have to admire how many people in very bitter cold temperatures, minus 25. Showed up. A friend of mine showed up. He was there just to sort of witness it and soak it in. And him and I have gone to other protests to document them, essentially.
I obviously won't give their identities away, but I may or may not know a few people who are actually. Let's just say the Canadian state is not on the best terms with them as a result of these things, and they may be abroad right now. But the response to this, and I actually got curious about a month and a half ago, was started flipping through some Canadian media, and they had one of the members of parliament, I think it was a quote-unquote conservative, talking about how the Canadian state is actually trying to crack down on these people, and he gave the half-hearted conservatives like, "Oh, what they did wasn't good, but the response is excessive, blah blah blah." But I not until I really saw that, it was in the back of my mind, but I didn't quite realize how drastic the response to this, even throughout the rest of this year, has been.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was very violent. I think people saw the footage with the horse started trampling, and there was a woman on a wheelchair. It was just horrendous, and I will always blame Putin for this. And
he was the one that caused it. I mean, he gave money to those truckers. He gave them the big rigs. He upgraded them with the mud flaps.
Yes, that's right. I remember at work joking, like when it was happening, saying it's like, who's funding all of this? And they go, who? I said, same guy who funded January 6th. That was before they started suggesting that. And then I remember the next day, like one of the guys I work with says, dude, they actually said that. And I go, of course they said that. Like, you haven't figured that out? Like, you can... I go, it's easy. You can be a psychic too.
It was like today I was listening to a friend of the show, Alex. Well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe one day. I was listening to Alexander McCoy, and he was covering this Wall Street Journal article, and it was about how Putler, how he's like, basically, like, he's paranoid. He was giving erratic orders to take Solidar, but they're like, we don't have troops there. This is a few months into the war, and he's giving direct erratic orders. But really, if you look at like the history of Putin and the way like his command structure works, he never gives direct orders. It's always through Shoigu, then it's through Gerasimov, and then eventually it'll whittle down to like the lower command, Sudovikin. I don't even think he talks to Sudovikin directly, like one-on-one. He mostly talks through Shoigu. So, but you know what they're doing, basically, the Wall Street Journal. They're doing the Austrian painter in the bunker in his final moments.
Yes.
Well, apparently he's being kept alive. This is what the Sun said, the U.S., not the U.S., not the Canadian, the British Sun, that he's being kept alive to wage the war on anti-cancer drugs. Like they're keeping him alive on strings. Not Brandon in the States. Putin in the Kremlin, he's being kept alive on stilts. Like Weekend at Putin.
He's literally a walking Lenin, and not yet embalmed.
Yeah, then he fell down the stairs and lost control of his bowels. Oh, I'm sorry, that's actually Joe Brandon, but I confuse the two sometimes.
I do love all the projection that the West does. I always find that funny.
But it's been a year of that.
It's been a year of that, and in a way, it's been more of that than we've seen in the last 5.
Yeah. Well, actually, last 20 if you account the Iraq War in Afghanistan. Like, we didn't even hate, maybe in the beginning where you had like the spectacle of it, but I think like 5 years in, I mean, the average American probably didn't hate Arabs that much after like after the Bush administration. It's like,
Yeah. Well, you can see how this will work into their, let's say, into their ideology, right? One of the great points that I saw on Twitter near the end of the year was how the Iraq War, in a way, gave birth to, the online atheists, where
yes, it did. Yep.
right, where it was the war in Iraq was a critique on religion itself, although they hesitated in directly criticizing Islam.
Yeah.
They made up for it by criticizing Christianity.
A few didn't, like Pat Condell was one of the few that did go after Islam, but yeah.
Yeah. But nobody criticized the dancers on 9/11.
Yeah, George Bush and his Jewish advisors wage war on Muslims, Christians to blame.
Yeah.
Yes.
But like it was the beginning of the Iraq War, like the holy war rhetoric that like, which is essentially like a cynical, like Straussian neocon tactic of David Frum to write those speeches, him himself like despising Christianity for a variety of reasons, which we won't get into for YouTube reasons. But, him cynically playing the Bush administration with this crusader religious holy war rhetoric, and all those like books about radical Islam from the neocons. It's like really the cynical, like underhanded Straussian tactic where it's like, well, America is the only place where it's like, like we're tolerated, and political theology is essentially just liberal, like classical liberal political science. So it's like, well, we have to deal with these Christians who were like the ruling majority in America, at least at that time. And so it's like, what are we going to do? We're going to cynically exploit them to like destroy the enemies of this world order, which so happens to be Muslims. Now it's not. No, it's no longer Muslims, of course. It's other Christians.
Yeah, you have to wonder, like, how long was that going to go, right?
Yeah,
because it was so, like, even for America in the early 2000s, that was almost beyond the pale. Like, it surprised a lot of people, and the country didn't have a lot of Muslims to begin with, but they made great efforts. Even the Bush administration, right, to tap down on that, but also not to castigate the military too much.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of shit libs at that time that like looked at this as an opportunity to criticize Christianity under the veil of religion itself. So I often wonder, like 2, 3, 4 years down the road, is something going to happen that has a cultural impact in the way that atheism did? But not necessarily atheism, of course. After the war in Ukraine, that is at first, like the one difference between this war and 9/11 is this war basically has asked everyone in the West to reject everything Russian.
Yes.
Now they've pulled back on some of it, so there are still some operas or sonatas, or like there are cat shows where a Russian blue can be shown. However, the main reason for this was to isolate Russia culturally and historically from the way it has always thought of itself as being part of Europe, right?
I think Europe, the population, Americans were always isolated from Russia to begin with.
That's true. That's true. But so I just wonder, like, when to come out of it, because in this case, what's different is you are allowed to directly use every trope and hate them directly.
Literal Austrian painter tropes about the Russians.
Yeah. So if anything, what that'll do, my belief is it will strengthen their already pervasive idea that the West is against totalitarianism of every kind, whether fascist or communist, totalitarianism, authoritarianism is wrong, and so on. But to be honest, the society is also not the way it was 21 years ago.
Yeah.
The society is much more divided now than it has been. But it's just something I thought about today.
You know, that's a very interesting point. I think, like, don't quote me on this because I've only read a bit of it, but I'd be worth looking into if, like, some of my Orthodox friends could talk about this. You know, Seraphim Rose, he wrote, Father Seraphim Rose wrote Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're Orthodox, GSP. What am I talking about? Oh my God. Oh my God. No, but you know how he wrote about how basically Orthodoxy among, well, I mean, we know why. Like, come on, he was kind of like proselytizing, but he wrote that Orthodoxy would be in a better position than most other Christian denominations in the West in the future. And I think maybe, given like Zoomers that are like converting to Orthodoxy in the South, especially in America.
Who could that be? Who could that be?
I don't know.
I swear there's somebody you do a show with on a regular basis. He's in the South. No, you know what? I actually know. Well, I know this guy directly, but he also has a friend. Both Zoomers. And both of them converts to Orthodoxy. Both of them Canadians, like founding stock Canadians, right? Anglo and Scottish.
Oh yeah.
So you know, and I will say there is something to that, right?
But like the way that New Atheism was a reaction to the Christianized anti-Muslim rhetoric of the Iraq and Afghanistan war. Like, I wonder if they could push, like, you know, global homogeneity so far that Russia is basically just equated with like Christianity as a whole, and therefore the reaction to that will be Orthodoxy. Yeah,
I mean, there's already a subversion against Orthodoxy taking place with Patriarch Bartholomew basically recognizing this heretical church in Ukraine while the canonical church is being repressed. They've been their last day in the Lavra of Kiev will be December 31st. So
I mean, this is the Kremlin, though. GSP, they're agents of the Kremlin.
yeah, that's right.
So they deserve. I mean, they have,
even though they've condemned the war and condemned Moscow for the war. Yeah. Like, I've actually donated to that church, by the way.
Well, there was state TV in Ukraine that basically was laughing at the fact that priests are going to get redacted because of this.
Oh yeah. I think one thing about this war,
but they're wholesome Chungus liberals now. Did you know that recently they proposed a bill, an anti-gay discrimination bill in Kiev? Did you see that?
Oh, absolutely. That's not a shock at all. And you already had Zelensky running his flaps about.
It was in pink news.
Yeah,
well, I will do one better, guys.
Yo, do tell.
Sorry, I'm just ranting, boys. I'm just ranting. Oh my God.
The new Ukrainian foreign diplomat for Bulgaria is a sexologist.
Whoa!
Yes,
he's a sex therapist.
She is.
She is. She's probably a beautiful Ukrainian. Is she a beautiful Ukrainian woman?
I don't know. I haven't seen a picture of her.
Oh.
You know, I mean, you drink enough, and
maybe she could get. Maybe she could do some repeat. Bulgaria. So I'd imagine like she could get taught about a repeat from a land shark, my good friend land shark. So, sexologist, that will teach you. Like, this is what repeat said. I'd have a better sex life.
Punish the Bulgarians. Send them the sexologist.
They just send up land sharks. It's like, here, deal with it.
Let's just set the record straight and say this is probably some fat old Yenta, if I had to guess. It's me personally. But feel free to disagree.
I mean, I have no idea, to be honest. I'll have to look into it, dear listeners. Well, of course, we're recording right now. I can't, but yeah.
What's the name?
I don't know. It's just like, I don't know. When the foreign minister is a sexologist, that's kind of the only thing you remember.
Well, we're monitoring the situation.
Yes.
Former Bulgarian minister slams country's neutral stance on. I'm desperate now. I'm looking this up.
This Slava Ukraine or whatever. What a what a wonder. This country is actually the bastion of the white race that's going to fight off the
Oh, here it
Turco-Mongol
is.
hordes. Like, thank you, Ukraine, for your invaluable service to the white race.
Yeah, her name is Olesia
Yeah.
Ilyashchuk. She's was the Chuk is like the.
Oh my God, she looks exactly like mildly attractive, like sex therapist older woman would look like. I'm not joking. She's pretty good. I mean, you know, but she looks like you could tell she's probably like a weirdo, like
Yeah.
I'm a sex therapist. Like
Come here, I cure you of your incelism.
I
heard the Ukrainian plastic for you. That's like
you will no longer be incel after one night with me.
I wouldn't kick her out of bed. I like older women, especially Slavic older women. My God, like Mummy Anna.
Gio, we were gonna have to stop you. Just stop.
No, by all means, continue. This is fascinating.
I'm an Anna man.
I love it when Gio just starts to take off, man. It's just.
Gotta get the bingo chart. Simping is like the free zone. Can you imagine? I should make a shirt. Like when I go on the Red Scare one day, it's like it says like, you know, I'm an Anna man. Oh boy. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. But no, it's true. They did pass an anti-discrimination. I'm going to Pink News right now. Pink News Ukraine. Yeah, Russian-Ukraine War Archive.
Oh, that's what it's going to do. After this war, there will be less tolerance for homophobia.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
But that will be the war aim of the West, I feel.
Yeah.
Apart from regime change.
More sex positivity, and you know, clamping down on Western incels, and it's perfect, and just more gay crap.
That's how they cure the incel problem. It's like state mandated GFs. No, well, there'll be state mandated GFs, but they'll be impossible women. So. Oh man, I'm actually searching right now. I saw this on one of these Telegram channels. But it's, you know, Ukraine. There's how are LGBT sheltering during bombings in Kiev? Yes, here we go. December 26th is LGBTQ plus hate speech in big step for equality, written by. Wow, her name is Chuddy. That's amazing. It's a disinfo off by the Kremlin. Legislation banning hate speech and incitement based on sexual orientation and gender identity was unanimously approved on 15 December. It's a big step for Ukraine to start adoption of our legislation to European values. Olena Shechekov, chair of LGBT plus Q rights groups Insight, told Washington. It's funny because Insight here in Canada, as me and GSP know, is the shoot up place, the drug place. So this is by Adam Zivo. This is a new law banning discrimination against LGBT plus Q people. The bill comes after President of Zelensky, Vladimir, conforms. I should say Z-Man because I'm kind of paranoid about YouTube. He will ask Ukraine's government to look into legislating same-sex marriage after the war with Russia ends.
You know, this is the second time he's pushed for this.
Really?
Yeah, in the late spring, he pushed for this as well. I could have sworn it was in May or June.
Oh yeah, it was all the way back in May. I remember, and that's It was part of the big push, and I remember making several jokes at the time that, damn, I guess they really need more aid.
And here's at the very end of the article. While Ukraine is pushing forward with pro-LGBTQ plus legislation, Russia has made steps backwards, expanding its draconian gay, quote, gay propaganda so that the ban on promoting LGBTQ plus material or education now encompasses Russian people of all ages. So they can't tell the little Russian children about anal sex anymore.
Oh, that's so sad. But on a related
Oh my
note, did
God,
you see that?
so tragic.
Did you
I
see
can't believe this.
that Santa Claus Putin commercial in Russia where he saves the boy from the gay parents or whatever it is?
Yikes!
Oh, yikes! That's like those it's like those like commercials you get on porno sites where it's like Santa's like gives you a dildo or whatever. It's like literally. Not that I would know. I don't frequent. But from what I heard.
But moving on. So I guess the next big event was I guess we're already talking about it, but was the war.
Oh, you want to talk about the talks though, the peace talks in January, but then we didn't fully cover.
Yes, yeah. Well, I said I'll end it here with the peace talks or the negotiations in Kazakhstan, but after that, as I said earlier, Putin made the announcement that the both the Lugansk and the Donetsk People's Republics will be in Russia. We should also remember that heavy shelling of the republics began again. It happened in April 2021, and a lot of people were pretty concerned in 2021 that is when the war was going to open up. However, it didn't, and Biden shortly, sometime in November, said that they are going to pull out of Afghanistan, and we know now because Blinken this year mentioned that they did so they'll be able to finance Ukraine. But heavy shelling began against the Donbass less than a year after April 2021, in late January, early February. And that just didn't stop. And I knew, because one of the things we said on the show was there won't be a war. Russia's not going to invade unless Ukraine continues to bomb Donetsk city and Lugansk. If it doesn't stop, Putin will literally have no choice. Yeah. He will have to go in. And especially after his speech on the 22nd, and we should also recall at the Munich Security Conference, Zelensky said that he would begin a nuclear enrichment program, and then had various people like Blinken and even Boris Johnson hinting at Ukraine's inevitable ascension into NATO, and so on and so on. And you put that together with the shelling of the Donbass republics, and I guess the only outcome that could happen is the war. Of course, I thought that it would be stopped again the way it happened in April the previous year.
But that was, if I recall, a month or two into the war. Maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but Z-Man was going to actually step to the negotiating table.
Yes, that did happen at the end of March.
Yeah, and then Boris Johnson flew over there, and he's like, "Don't do it." Like that's, yeah. But I think we should probably talk about what we feel is like the real causes of it, because the Western media is like, it was unprovoked. And it was basically
they always have to tell you that it was unprovoked.
Yeah, it was like the Sudetenland, right? It was yeah. But really, I mean, if you want to go back, I mean, even before the dissolution of the Soviet Union, you had people like talking about it. Like it's even like Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that. He when did he die? What year did he die?
Early 2000s.
I think it was in the 90s.
Yeah.
Either early 2000s or late 90s, as I remember.
Because I think he got some sort of medal from Putin, so it would have had to be like early 2000s.
You're right. And he's, the story goes he told Putin to protect Russia and so on. But yes, you're right, Jake. Yeah, it would have been in the early 2000s. So yeah, and then the war broke out, and a lot of this is familiar territory. Um, we all heard, like, within 2 hours somehow the sea, and this is all happening at night, right? No one really knows the extent of the damage.
There was apparently
the Pentagon says, "Oh, 96 hours, it'll be all over."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Millie
they
going out
said
there
that about
gaslighting
Gulf
the
War
world.
I. They said that about Gulf War II. They said that about Afghanistan. Like,
Yeah.
They said that about World War II, actually. It'd be over by Christmas when America entered the war.
Yes.
So, yeah. No, but I was going to say that, yeah, he died in 2008. And he even said right before he died, right on the cusp of, well, I think he died before or after they invaded Georgia.
Yeah.
But he said the tensions in the region with Russia would only basically, having extensively toured in the West as well, he was very familiar, like after the Soviet Union collapsed, he was familiar with the way that Western people, were like, and he went to New York and I believe, and so he predicted this more or less. A bunch of people like that are more well-minded in political science and economics, such as Jeffrey Sachs, even very recently saying this, that the tensions that the West has bred within Russia, during that period in the early 90s to late 90s, was never going to be tolerated for very long, right until the dissolution of Yeltsin and the ascension of Putin. And I think that the causes of the war, of course, logically, from the Kremlin's perspective, was this buildup of armaments, these various far-right groups that were being shipped over into places like Mariupol, the general buildup and the shelling of Donetsk city. But I don't know if there could be another reason why this year of all years, apart from it being like a cosmic spiritual cycle type of thing, this year in particular, why he started it. Could it be that this was the tense moment that he finally realized that the confrontation with the Western powers was inevitable? Could it have been that he got some form of intel about the real troop numbers and buildup that they were doing in Ukraine? Could it be the nuclear thing? I mean, there's a variety of reasons. I mean, the demographic problems in Russia and Ukraine. I don't know.
I personally think that when Putin says he didn't know better and he apologizes, he was wrong, and he did in his most recent speech. I personally think he always knew, but I think it's safer to say that you didn't know than to say you knew.
Yeah.
But you couldn't do anything about it. If you look at what Russia began doing from 2014 and onwards, it can only be described as preparing for a monumental war with the West, and that begins with creating its own visa monetary system, its own financial messaging system to replace SWIFT. It had to get China on board.
And you even saw this with Syria, where it deepened its ties to its only Mediterranean port, not only exercising its military, but also securing its foothold in that region as well. So you had the economic aspects, and then you also saw the massive military buildups. You saw I don't know, some of you may remember in 2018 the quote-unquote Satan missile tests where they had that. And it was just an all-around strategy to prepare Russia for, at the very least, a ground war with Ukraine that had great potential to spread into a multi-front war, whether that next front is in the Caucasus, Kazakhstan, other parts of Eastern Europe, such as Poland and Belarus, where they had no choice but to kick the can down the road. Now, I should say, as of this war, I do think he had no choice but to act, because at that point you had the West gassing up Ukraine for several years now that Biden is in office, giving them almost completely the green light to go in and take care of the Donbass situation. At that point, I would say that is actually what started the conflict, and then Russia's military response is what turned it into what it is today, and that Putin didn't decide this is the exact moment. It's that he didn't really have a choice at the moment, and that choice was actually on the shoulders of the West and their Ukrainian proxies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you could also get into, the resentment that Western Ukrainians have always had for the Russians.
Mm.
It precedes even, it definitely precedes uh, um, the Russian Revolution, uh, because it begins even earlier than the First World War. And a lot of Germans and Austrians were basically giving them a kind of history that they've latched onto, that they are actually the real Rus,
On
the
top
real
of purging
descendants.
any of the pro-Russian elements throughout that
Yeah,
period from like
and it's why they
1914 to
call Russians
1919.
Muscovites, because they're furious that they've taken away their title, Rus. So it predates a lot of that.
And that was
And
grafted onto Banderite ideology in the 20th
yes,
century.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it goes further back, but that is what is nurtured in the various evolution of that ideology, even though these guys never were part of Russia. I mean, you could argue in the Dark Ages, maybe, they were part of these different kingdoms,
When the
and
Tartars were running through them
even before that,
equally. Yeah, even
before that,
before. Yeah.
even 300 years before that,
Man.
right? In the, let's say, the 10th century or even the 9th century, right? But not so they were never like, if you look at Ivan the Terrible as the first, de facto leader of an organized Russian state, like, they were never part of that.
Mm.
And yet this animosity again was created against the Russians. So they never had to, they lived under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or against, or under the Prussians or the Poles. They never lived under Russian rule, and yet it was there. And so that's something that was always
But this is
nurtured.
Western Ukraine. Eastern Ukraine was pretty much more or
Yeah.
less part of Russia. Well,
Yes. Well, it depends which period, right?
yeah, yeah. But like east of the Dnieper, let's say, like.
Yeah.
Mm.
And another way maybe of asking why did this war start at 2022, I think the war starting in 2022 is actually more determined by the West than by Russia.
Mm.
Why did it take the West so long? Right? You could argue that,
You said this last week about Afghanistan, I remember.
Yeah.
Like,
so,
as soon, yeah, go, yeah.
Yeah, so you could argue that, I don't want to say Trump's all responsible for it, because there were a lot of things he wanted to do that he couldn't do, including removing all the troops out of Syria. But the fact of the matter is, it would have been better for the U.S. to have had Hillary as president in 2016, and let's say maybe a year or two more of training to unleash the war then. Of course, they would have had to pull out of Afghanistan. So I think if you look at it from a Western point of view, there must have been a lot of trepidation about what the cost would be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure the blowing up of Nord Stream 2 and 1 was something that was planned. Stopping those streams, yes, but not necessarily by blowing them up. In a hypothetical world where the Russian economy would have collapsed in the first 3 months, I can't see the reason why the Americans would blow up the Nord Stream pipelines, especially if things looked like they were working in America's favor. So I would say that America wasn't fully prepared for this either. And I think, like you said, getting out of Afghanistan is the crucial moment when they decided uniformly that they would be ready to unleash this. I think they fully expected the Russian economy to collapse
Mm-hmm.
within the first 3 months. Then I think they had hope within the first 6 months. So by August, it would collapse.
I
But I
remember
No,
when
think
they made a
it
big
was
deal
true by
about
June or July that wouldn't happen.
the big deal about Russia's economy is going to default by June, and then that happened. and there was no real consequences of any sort that affect the Russian economy. In fact, it actually served in isolating them further from the West and creating a greater split and having less Western economic pressure on Russia after said default.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that if we're going to play alternative history, I mean, there would be many things that I think would have accelerated if Hillary, got in, not
Yeah.
Trump. 2016 would have never happened.
Ukraine probably would have had gay marriage.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think the right wing in America would probably be totally demoralized beyond belief. I mean, who knows? Maybe they would have.
Pepe hanging himself memes everywhere.
There would have been ack memes, but it would only be like, but no, but I think that to play alternative history though, what would have happened if Putin himself would have been like, well, I guess we can't go in there, and like maybe thousands of Russian citizens, well, now citizens, but thousands of ethnic Russians in Ukraine would have died. They would have been basically G-word-eyed fodder for these far-right groups like Azov. What do you think would have been the implications for Putin and the West? Do you think that
if he had gone in 2014 or 15?
No. I mean, if he would have done nothing this year, if he would never have invaded.
It would have been over, I think. His
really?
I think his political career would have been over. They would have started eventually shelling. Like, I think the Ukrainians had amassed enough men that they would be able to
take Crimea.
Let's say it would take them a few months to take Donetsk City or Lugansk, right?
Yeah.
And then after that, it would be short order. They would begin attacking Crimea.
And they would have probably G-word-eyed, redacted everyone along the way, I would imagine. Ethnic Russians.
Right.
Yeah. So they would, and if they would have taken Crimea, it would have been over for Russia in general, not just Putin.
I mean, that's his risk.
Right.
When talks of Ukraine's inevitable ascension into NATO in Hungary in 2008, Putin said, if you do that, I will take Crimea. So there would have been a war, for sure. He would have, let's say, accepted the loss of Donbass.
Yeah.
But Crimea would have been too strategic. And so the war would have been inevitable anyways. It just would have happened differently. He couldn't have fought the war in 2014. If you like, we did this on the show throughout the year, where we talked about how much of the Russian economy was filled with American dollars in 2014.
Yeah.
And remember, like, even though the Chinese wooed the Russians over in the mid to late 90s to work with them, the Chinese are very risk averse, and it was Putin who had to convince them. And I think that's why he did visit Xi Jinping and waited until the end of the Olympics in order to retaliate for the shelling on Donbass. So I think there were not enough things in place. If the West had committed like half of the sanctions that they did to Russia in 2014, I don't know if Russia could have survived economically. And I think an admonition here, like before the war started, I took a deep look into what kind of sanctions were dealt to the Russians in 2014 and 15. They never stopped. They went on year after year. But one of the claims I made was that the worst of the sanctions have already happened. And that was a mistake, because I think the SWIFT thing would have been catastrophic if Russia didn't have its own visa system. That would have been catastrophic if they had done that in 2014 or 15. And really, it's only because they prepared that didn't go that way. So I was wrong. The outcome was the same, that the sanctions wouldn't work, but I was wrong for different reasons that they didn't work. Because I guess one of the things that was batted around during that time in January and early February was, and indeed well into February, actually, even after the war started, was would they stop the SWIFT monetary system, right?
Mhm.
And I just thought it was crazy because there were countries that were resisting it. But one by one, they all eventually fell in line. So that was one thing I did not consider. Um, even
No,
though
but
I did mention that the SWIFT, like stopping the SWIFT, as catastrophic as that might be, won't be enough to do in Russia because they created an alternative to it, and
yeah,
because China basically has their back.
yeah. No, but I mean, say if Putin were to say to the West, the beginning of the year, like, as long as you don't touch Crimea, you know what? You could just have those people. Who cares? It would have been over pretty much for his 20-year reign or so. I mean, it would
Oh
have
yeah,
been.
yeah. Oh, I mean, the West would never agree
But what
to give
happens
up
if there
Crimea.
was? But that's what I mean. Like, if there was also massive amounts of like war crimes and G-word iding in the East, in Donetsk City and so forth, the West obviously would have just ignored that, right? They would have been like,
Yeah,
that's not real.
I mean, in some ways, I'll say this. This is what I learned after a year, and it fits basically with my observations from going to Russia. Especially the first 2 years, my first two visits, which were back to back, 2015 and early 2015 and sort of mid 2016. What I fully expected was that I would, make friends and acquaintances, and they would eventually bring up the war in Donbass. The thing is nobody did. Now, granted, most of the people I spoke with were younger than I was, but even on rare occasions with those that were my age or not too much younger than myself, they didn't bring it up. And when Ukraine came up, or Ukrainians came up, because they thought the way I spoke Russian, which is like not very good, but they understood me. They said I spoke it with a Ukrainian accent, and that's probably because of the influence of South Slavic.
Mm.
Um, but generally, their opinion was positive about the Ukrainians. So even with all that going on, they thought, yeah, Ukrainians are cool. They're actually nice. They're nice. Um, I think Putin actually read the situation correctly. The more this war goes on, and that is the Russian public in 2014 would not have been willing to go to war. I mean, there would have been far more resistance. They
Well,
would not have. They would not have wanted like a war like the one we're seeing now.
yeah, yeah. No, but even to Westerners, I mean, I saw this. I know this is anecdotal, but Russians with attitude, they said that historically, like whenever there was like American Western tourists in Russia, they're always treated with respect, and they're like, "Oh, you're American, come over." Um, but this is the first year he said that. I forget the one who runs the Twitter account. That said, like, this is the first year there's actual animosity towards Westerners because of like the insane rhetoric and just what's happening, and the fact that Russians are like mongoloid subhumans now to like most Europeans and Westerners. So I like that's a huge shock. Like, even I mean, even during the Soviet Union, the average like Russian probably didn't buy into the propaganda because they had illegal Levi jeans they were wearing. So it was like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it was American. I mean, I was blunt with them, and I remember one guy who owned the hostel. I ended up interrogating him. I've mentioned this story before. I'll just say it again. Um, so he said, the government, and this is kind of emblematic of my attitude when I was there. Like, if I saw American simping, I would just say, "F America, dude. What's wrong with you?" They would be like, "Oh yeah, you're Canadian." I go, "F Canada too."
For both.
So, um, he started complaining about the government and this. And I said to him, well, there's a lot of subversives in this country from abroad. There are a lot of foreigners who want to cause trouble here. And I go, it doesn't bother me. I know why Russia has to do this. I accept it. And he lowered his head. And I said something like, F America and F NATO, my dude. And he lowered his head. And I crouched down and pivoted my head up so I could make eye contact. And I said, you agree, don't you?
Oh, Anton Chigurh moment right there.
Dude.
Yes.
He was so scared.
Oh, that's brutal. Just...
So like I never tolerated that. I never understood it. I wanted to wake them up, like. But all that said, they didn't want war, and they didn't want any more escalation than there already was, even back then in 2015. So I think, people talk about, yes, Putin did wait too long for the mobilization, but I think you also have to look at the other equation, which is the Russian public is more adverse to this than people think. I would say as the months go on, they're less adverse. Negative feelings towards America and Europe have increased. That's based on my conversations with Russians. So I would echo what you said earlier.
It's kind of like a reverse situation of Iraq in America, where at the beginning there was like so much patriotism, like it was everywhere. It was literally like on Monday Night Raw, where like Scott Steiner debated the guy pretending to be a Harvard professor. Like it's that level. But then as the war went on, it was like nobody cared, or they're like, please, this is terrible. So now it's that was a great debate actually. Scott Steiner won by giving him. No, I think they banned him from using the Steiner screwdriver. He had to like give them power bomb or something. But in Russia, it seems as the war goes on, there's actually more sentiment for it, and I think that's probably just largely because of like the Western attitude towards Russians. But also,
I think it's clear now that it's clear to them now that Ukraine is a proxy.
Yes.
For a war on Russia, I think they accept that now. That is the case, and
but whether you can believe it or not, apparently Putin's approval rating has hovered above like 78 to 80%. I mean, let's face it, that's probably.
I mean, Levada says that it's. I mean, those are Western sources.
Yeah, true.
So
no, but in that case, the propaganda would be more accurate, because then that would what I've noticed, like the Notho libs saying, is that in fact, yes, it's true that Putin genuinely does have such a high approval rating, because every single ethnic Russian is at fault and should be held responsible.
Yeah,
and I've seen this by libs. Like every single ethnic German was held responsible by the Soviet court system during Nuremberg. That's literally what they're saying now. That's the rhetoric.
They want this indictment of entire nations. So the previous Western rhetoric from 1945 onward, where we're trying to win the hearts and minds of the people. Of course, we love you. We just hate your government. We're trying to free you. That gradually erodes to the point where we are today, where you are an ethnic enemy, you are a civilizational enemy, you are part of the system, and you are just as guilty
and
as...
you love your government. It's evil.
Yes, and just getting back to some of the questions about war enthusiasm in Russia, you could see very early on, up until the summer, up until the first mobilization, there was a very stringent effort on the part of the Russian government to try to make this war where we can fight this, but this will have no discernible effect on your lives, and we can do this. This is a civilizational changing thing, but just go about your day. Almost reminiscent of the George Bush, well, like, hey, why don't you just go shopping, as he said after 9/11. Not to compare Putin to Bush in any sort of way, but it is reminiscent of that rhetoric. And a personal anecdote I have from a Russian guy I spoke to said that he actually knew a friend's aunt who was a liberal, at least by Russian standards, who opposed the war, but a few months in, after listening to Western media, was preparing care packages for the soldiers in the front lines. So
Wow.
it's one of those things where just giving the West enough rope to redact itself has done wonders for, at least to my understanding, the Russian public opinion of this war, where they are far more tolerant of the measures that might have to be taken because they've seen the response to what was initially, and I suppose still technically is, a quote-unquote special military operation.
We should also remember that there were really big protests in, I believe, 2011 or 2012 when Putin was running for office.
Yeah, that was as he was
Yeah.
coming back into the presidency after he stint as prime minister because
Right.
the
And
term
when you
limit
consider
system.
that Maidan started in November 2013, those events are not far apart. Right? You can understand the hesitancy of Putin doing something because and this now I remember that and I say that, but interestingly, Russians with Attitude mentioned it as well in a recent podcast that they did, and they said something that I was not aware of, and that is that a lot of um, liberal Russians and also like extreme right wing Russians like literally went to Ukraine, and some of them, joined these neo-Nazi paramilitary groups as well.
Yeah.
So, um, so that is something to think about, right? Like, Russians felt like that the Medvedev years was just a big scam.
It was just Putin's puppet, like him
Yeah,
taking a break in the Black
and they were
Sea.
very upset by that, and they thought like, so you can see that the country expected a kind of Western liberalization to continue. And really, when you look at Putin's first term after Medvedev, you can see him trying to balance somewhere between pragmatic civic nationalism and European integration and into the liberal order. But there's a certain point he can't go. And um, he could have continued on that course a little bit longer, but I think when he made the anti-gay propaganda laws in 2013, I think that was a clear sign that he was not going to play ball. Back then, it reverberated, but in the West, but it had. I, I suppose if that kind of law had happened a little bit later, the West would have been even more shocked by it. It's just that in 2013, the Russians doing something like that was less shocking. There was more of this allowance back then that certain countries were not really Western the way other Western countries were. And, you can mention Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Egypt or whatever. And, they just were not going to go along with it. There's less acceptance of that, particularly after the Trump presidency, right? So, yeah, I would say that it's important to understand this period because it's those 2 to 4 years just prior to Maidan, and they're really important in the way they shaped, I think, some of his decision making. And it was kind of funny when he got reelected. He was very emotional about it. And when he got elected in 2018, I remember the Western press being prepared for huge protests, and that didn't happen. Right. So there was some kind of a normalization that occurred. Right. But if he had mobilized forces to go into Ukraine sometime in 2014 or perhaps even 2015 to end the hostilities once and for all, China wouldn't have been there. His economic sector, the banking sector, would not have been prepared. And I don't know what the Russian public's patience would have been.
Now, although they were complete farce, I think it also is worth noting that you had the entire Navalny nonsense in the beginning of 2021 as
Oh
well.
yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and that didn't work out. That was a big flop.
He's boarding the plane. Oh my God! Wholesome Chungus freedom.
Reddit
Like
Trotsky on
Moscow and
his way
St.
home.
Petersburg had healthy sized protests. There's some wild scenes out of that, but it was like one weekend and it didn't repeat itself the next weekend, and it just it fizzled away. Really, there was nothing comparable to the protest that happened, I think, what was it, 2012, 2011?
Yeah, it was 2011 and 2012 to the point where you even had several of the bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church coming out and not necessarily condemning him, but calling on him to take more "quote unquote" moderate positions. To the point where, the big KGB controlled church had the gall. It's all an inside job, and that was just controlled opposition. I'm sure they would tell you within their schizophrenic theories, but
That's a great point.
but yes, to the point where even and look, don't get me wrong, I say all that, but many of the bishops and look, I can't speak for the entire situation, how right or wrong it is. Many of the bishops do have a warmer relationship with the government than, say, most countries in the world today. But I mean, even like just a decade ago, they were tacitly supporting the protesters.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oh wow! But how is the situation though? I mean, I guess they're pretty much in line now, but with the Russian Orthodox Church and the Kremlin, are they still like buddies or? Because like
Yeah,
there
they're
was
aligned.
because there was times where like Putin sort of kind of fell out of favor with them, but not really. I mean, after having such a long reign, it's like inevitable. But I think now that's pretty much, especially with what's happening in Ukraine, like in Kiev in particular. Yeah, like with the religious situation.
Again, in Putin's speech, he was referring several times about unifying Russia. Ideologically, Russia wasn't prepared for this war, and it's had to learn to prepare for this war. It has been a baptism of fire. It has been a crossroads, and I think that one foot in the liberal order and one foot in its past has come to an end, and this year has made that possible. And with both feet in history, they will have to figure out some kind of a workable identity. I think they're on the road to that. The biggest surprise, of course, is economically, Russia's done very well. People expected between 15 to 18% GDP reduction. It's been only 2.5.
And that's not to mention the
Uh,
ruble having a miraculous recovery as a result of
yes,
some of the economic rearrangements made in light of the sanctions, such as with China and India, and the deprivation of Europe, which we do have also quite a bit of European retrospective to get on. If
yeah, let's get,
so if you guys
yeah.
have anything more about Ukraine, certainly, but there's also plenty to cover about Europe as well.
Yeah.
But I just think that it is kind of, there is like in a way a cosmic coincidence, the fact that the beginning of this year, like after the Covidian era, after a lot of different things.
Yes.
Yeah. Why this war happened.
Well, I mean, that was one of the things that we talked about on the show.
Yeah.
I remember saying, like, back in August or September, we had a show, and I said, this is a loyalty test by the regime.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means in the West. And you're going to find out how many people are authentically loyal and how many can be made to repeat lines showing fealty to the regime, right? And I guess in a way it worked as a prep for the war in Ukraine, because I'm not saying they did the COVID thing because they knew they were going to get in a war with Ukraine. That's obviously, I'm not suggesting that. But these algorithms.
There were some schizos that did, but that's the point. Yeah.
There are still crazy people who think like this war isn't happening. It's exaggerated. They really do that. They really do that. They really think that. It's hilarious to me. But all that to say that, the people that were least likely to take the jab are still the people most likely to have a neutral position, a position that's not supportive of Ukraine, or a position that's supportive of Russia. But it's a portion of that. It's a fraction of that. It's not that entire group.
Yeah, but
which is one of the things which I said would happen, along with the right splitting into two factions over this war.
Well, it's very interesting though, because this war has like proved a lot of like ideological complications, both in the East and the West. I mean, I was saying before the show that as the time goes on, I think unfortunately like a lot of like the dissident right has become like either, if not like, implicitly consenting to like neocon talking points, but like Turbo America, or like, I mean, there was always a faction that was gladioified, without naming names. But I feel like it's very frightening, I feel, for like a lot of Americans in particular, to sort of look at like, okay, the regime is something more integral to the foundation of what, current day Americana is in general, rather than this alien political force that came out of the civil rights regime or whatever. I feel like that's very terrifying to a lot of even like dissident writers in America, who might have a lot of sympathy for it, but at the same time, being in Canada, it's easier for me to sort of switch my mind into a more objective position and to like actually look at, it's like, the ruling ideology of Canada is that we're doing this to you because you're evil, and you're going to love it because you're evil, and that's why we're doing it to you. That's why we have the most immigrants. That's why we have the MAID program. That's why we have, XYZ, whatever, ideological excess of the People's Republic of Trudeau. But I feel like when it comes to the ideological divide, that this war largely kind of was a jump off in some ways from the Covidian era. But I would say that in the beginning, there was sort of the like boomer truth regime of like, well, Russia, they're still communist. But then as time goes on, I'm noticing even like the Fox News viewers are starting to question it because of like I think the spending on the war. That's really what it is. For most
it's just the money.
It's the money.
That's all it comes down to. It is their own kind of isolationism.
Yeah.
And exceptionalism, but it's their form of isolationism and exceptionalism. The only thing I'll say about this is Academic Agent was the only person on the dissident right that actually said the same points that we were saying on the show all throughout late summer and fall, with regards how like things would be split, the correlation between supporting Ukraine and being against the jab and COVID restrictions, and he's the only one who like made those same points, and he made them like in February and March.
Oh yeah. But also when it comes to like that aspect of it, the money aspect of it, but also I feel that as it's sort of like pushing like the sort of, post Obama's like liberal America, that like we're fighting for democracy throughout the world and that you have to support this, and it's like you're gonna have to like accept austerity. Like when it comes down to it, I feel like as time goes on, these things will become much more pronounced and entrenched. But I do notice that there is a pushback, that there's sort of like, as long as there is such a thing as American exceptionalism, then we can tolerate like Europe becoming a vassal state. Like the fact that like a lot of these old school leaders of the quote unquote alt-right are like, let me talk about the right first, and I'll talk a little bit about the left. Okay, so the fact that a lot of these old school leaders, whether it be the hairdo or Greg Johnson, like the fact that they sort of in some ways implicitly, they would say not though. They would say that this is strengthening it, but in some ways they've implicitly abandoned their embracing of an older European identity. Yeah. But they would say that no, actually NATO is that representation of it, but it's led by America though, which is the sort of the dissolving like acidic force to that older, identitarian European identity. So it's like, oh no, not really, no, because it's like it's still like white people at the end of the day or something, whatever. Again, I mean, I have more respect for Greg Johnson than I do the hairdo, but and for those who know, I'm referring to Richard Spencer.
Yeah.
The hairdo. But I would say, but when it comes to the political left, of course, you have this war within the left, and of course, like always, like Occupy Wall Street, the neoliberal like regime-approved side won out. You had a faction of the left which very much during the, I would say, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and well, up until like, Yeltsin, was very much like tolerant of, well, Russia represents Soviet socialism, and maybe the West, and of course, a lot of that, Russia supported various third world uprisings, and of course, we're third worldists and we're post-colonialists and so forth. That faction of the left got bodied recently within 2021. Now it's these NAFO neoliberals, and they've had to come with very sometimes overtly like having creeped a lot of these spaces. Some of them, I mean, you can't tolerate them for very long. But if you actually examine the rhetoric of like leftoids on Twitter, they come up with all these weirdo conspiracies about the Kremlin funding the international far right through, I don't know, Trump and Peter Thiel, but also the anti-war like Caitlin Johnson. Well, not Amy Goodman sold out, but like Amy Goodman, Caitlin Johnson, like Occupy Wall Street anti-war left, which was much older in the 2000s in America. People now, they're basically like the gray zone leftoids. They're like agents of the mainstream leftoids, mainstream neoliberals. So as the war on the right was ideologically waged because of the war, like, because of the war in Ukraine. And BAP and Academic Age have both predicted that. I think Woods, ironically enough, also, predicted that as well. On the left, which goes unseen because, of course, their intra-conflictual battles are never aired out in public the way they are on the right wing. Because, of course, attacking each other generates content on the right wing. So, but I would say that the war between the regime-approved neolibs, radical liberals, the ones that want gay marriage in Ukraine, they won. The old school anti-war gray zone people, they're all, Caleb Moppet, fascist agent of the Kremlin. Caitlin Johnson, she's also an agent of the Kremlin, if I recall. Like, and they've also had to manufacture very like schizo conspiracy theories among the anti-Fanuc crowd, that like all these people that are like traditionally anti-war leftists, that they're all working for the Kremlin, and they're also working for fascists. So the fact that like Matt Taibbi and not Barry Weiss, because Barry Weiss was always like in the containment zone. She was always kind of a neocon. But the fact that like Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald and like, Snowden and these anti-war people, these like basically the remnants of Occupy Wall Street, the first wave before the woke tards destroyed Occupy Wall Street. Those people are now essentially just like fascist agents of the Kremlin, and the Kremlin funds global fascism.
Yeah, and then Tucker Carlson's also a big note for all this. They say
that's the gay marriage, right? That's the shibboleth.
Yeah, and trans rights.
Yeah, like
it's a shibboleth. Yeah, exactly.
Like helping out, former colonies and in Africa and South America. That's all great.
Yeah.
But gay marriage is much, much, much more important
than women and children getting macheted in the African continent.
Yeah, like it basically became the defining value of the West.
Yeah.
Right. It won. It's what destroyed the Occupy Wall Street movement, the anti-globalization movement. That shibboleth of gay marriage is absolutely pivotal. Anything that is not making gay marriage the most important issue in American foreign policy it's not liberal. Like
And even upscaling conflict in Iran will be that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're gonna say, Constantine. I think we cut you off.
I was just making a bit of a joke about Tucker Carlson, how he's like also like the puppet master of all these people, and then he answers the Kremlin, blah 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 blah.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. He's being paid off by the Kremlin. Him and Glenn Greenwald are the agents of global fascism. We're shit posters of the world unite.
Yeah, I also got to point it out now. We kind of touched on it last time we were here, actually, that one of the most vindicated men in recent years, especially with how gay marriage is the ultimate goal of the American empire, is Michael Jones. And he's been saying this for years now, longer than any of us have been saying it, but it's just credit where credit is due, I guess.
Yeah.
Global gay disco. Like, I love how he thinks gay culture is like an older, like 80s, like bathhouse version of gay culture still.
It's like almost wholesome.
Like, it's can't blame him.
It's like it's almost wholesome to listen to him like have this portrayal. It's like, you know, if that were the case, it wouldn't be good, but we would be a lot better than wherever we are right now.
Like, Michael Jones thinks that gay culture is still like a Tom of Finland drawing, and it's not like a young girl chopping her breasts off. Like it's kind of, he still thinks it's like a bathhouse in San Francisco.
It's almost quaint. It's almost quaint.
It's almost quaint, yeah. But the best was when he talked about booty ban. You know, it's funny because that was a personal thing with him when they tried to like sell Buttigieg to the American populace, because, you know, him being it's like, South Bend, Pete Buttigieg stole South Bend. Like, they basically wrote him in that election. Nobody actually voted for him in South Bend. You know, it was funny. He had a lecture about it. Someone mentioned Pete Buttigieg. Oh boy.
But let's move on to European news.
Oh yes, European news.
Big year for Europe. The year of the end for Europe.
The year Europe finally realized that's an American colony and unfortunately embraced it. Now I think we can start with no other place in European news than the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines, which really solidified all of this now, didn't it? Because you look at the trajectory of Europe for the past, I don't know, let's say 20, 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union. And it did look like there was some sort of genuine reconciliation there, to the point where, while it may not have been a warm and friendly relationship, that there may have been a cooperative relationship between the European continent and Russia as two power blocks. And that continued even after the annexation of Crimea. Of course, that's when the pressure started to get put on. But keep in mind, Nord Stream wasn't actually completed until after that. And Germany was always one of the countries, and it arguably still is one of the countries, that waffles back and forth when it comes to the sanctions, when it comes to quote-unquote punishing Russia, because of the energy concerns. Well, all of that was literally put at the bottom of the ocean with the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines. And that is just one in a series of events this year in particular of the Americans asserting their absolute domination over Europe. I would say probably the second biggest in this regard is the treatment of Hungary in this past year. Now, it's no secret that Hungary has always been at odds in recent years with the American Empire, with the apparatus in Brussels, which is a regional management post of the American Empire, if we're being honest. But this is the first time since the beginning of the dispute where you actually saw Hungarian funds frozen, and you actually saw a deliberate effort to crack down on the Hungarian state. Of course, they had their elections back in April. There were attempts for protest there, even though Fidesz won an overwhelming victory. There were sabotage attempts on the Turk Stream pipeline as well, just days after the sabotage attempts on, the successful sabotage on the Nord Stream pipelines. You had news of something happening with Turk Stream, and there were actually 2 or 3 different instances post Nord Stream that Turk Stream came under threat in both Hungary and Turkey. Now, all those instances were shut down and avoided, but there was still the distinct possibility that the other main flow of Russian energy into Europe was going to meet the same fate as Nord Stream and also be at the bottom of the ocean, so to speak. So it has become what is more or less a hot war in Europe waged by the United States at this point. And there's really no way around it that the American subjugation of Europe, which has been a process almost 80 years in the making, is complete. You had the French elections also in April of this year that resulted in Macron seizing a second term. Of course, that was in the light of the war. Le Pen was his opponent. Le Pen is well known for her anti-NATO and it's somewhat anti-American empire stances, I'll put it, but there was a snowball's chance in hell that somebody like that was ever going to be able to seize power in a time like this, let alone even under the most peaceful and calm of circumstances would that have ever happened. So I think anyone really could have seen this from a mile away. But and then you have the Italian election where you did get some positive results out of that, especially domestically. That when it comes to the dynamic of the American empire, it is more or less right in line, playing into that whole thing of gladio conservatism, as much as it pains me to say that, because I actually had a sliver of hope that the Italian elections, at least when they were first announced, may have had a greater result than they did, but, I mean, I'll take what I can get with some of the, let's just say, the LGBTQ CIA stuff on the domestic front getting shut down, but in terms of the American empire, that's just had no dent in it at all. But Europe, there is only so much you can say until we see how this winter plays out, but the continent has been economically devastated. The continent is effectively deindustrialized. Industry is halting, it is moving. Germany's been hit the hardest, I would say, followed by France. And even the UK, the traditional steadfast ally of the American empire, really, once again, one of those regional managers of the empire, also bore the brunt of this. The UK had a hell of a year when it comes to shake-up in political leadership when it came to its economic situation. I believe this is, this Suvak, this Indian man, he's about the third after Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, third prime minister to actually hold off this year, and even his position is uncertain to say the least. So, looking at this situation all around, Europe, I take no pleasure in saying this, don't get me wrong. We're seeing the death knell of them as really a relevant civilization that isn't under the thumb of the forces of the American empire. And the question, if it can recover, becomes something that seems more and more unlikely day by day, especially as the deindustrialization continues. When you had the economic titans that were once France and Germany going down the path they're going, especially Germany, I will harp on about the German deindustrialization, the continuum of that, day in and day out. But after that, you have this country that was the forefront of Europe for decades and had been the economic engine of the continent, once again, for decades, is now clearing its historic forests, these ancient forests, in order to pull coal out of the ground because they have no other alternatives for energy at this time because of the current sanctions debacle and because of their policy on nuclear energy. You have France, which is doing somewhat better, but really when it comes to energy needs isn't far behind. And that's not even getting into their industrial sectors, the amount of petroleum products they need that are unrelated to energy generation resources, because, once again, you need these petroleum products to manufacture several goods when you don't even necessarily need them to keep the lights on. So that has become a disaster as it is. Inflation is up all across the continent. The euro is below the US dollar. The pound is below the US dollar for the first time in decades at this point. So,
yeah, for both of them.
Oh, it is.
Both of them were ahead before the war started.
Yeah, there's really no other words to put it than this continent had been... The copper wire has been stripped from their house. America is the gypsy upon Europe that is grabbing every piece of wealth it can to sustain itself for the short amount of time that it has left before it suffers a similar fate, and is pushing Europe's head right under the water in order to secure that position for the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years at best.
You want a picture
America
of the
Zingada
future?
Nation.
You want a picture of the future? It's a gypsy with nuclear arms
Oh,
stripping copper out of your toilet.
But let's say, like, I think Britain needs to be paid, like most things in European politics, Britain needs to be paid special attention to. I think like what's happened to them has probably been like one of the most harrowing years in British history.
Mhm.
And that's saying a lot. Politically unstable,
Economically in
depressed.
tatters.
Yeah, in tatters. I think that, Boris Johnson, his emphatic, I would say, schizophrenic support for the war, and basically, I really, put blood on his hands when it comes to basically talking Z-Man into furthering the war. Now, granted, I feel that even, the West, even, and the Kremlin especially, was surprised at the endurance of the Ukrainians. You don't know what numbers to believe, but apparently they're up to now losing, what, two battalions a day on all the fronts.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
But I think
But with Britain, though, I mean, the political instability, especially, at this crucial time, like, it's funny. Like, I hate to say it this way because I have a lot of friends in Britain, but Britain is being reduced to a regional manager of the American Empire, but having their former peoples of various regional managers basically come into their country, and it's like, demographically Britain is facing.
It's the most
their
defeated
crisis.
country in the world, ruled by its former colonies abroad and at home. There's no other way around it. And once again, I don't say that as a ha-ha finger-pointing thing because we're not much...
saying this is Jonathan Bowden was the most vindicated man alive. Well, was vindicated man of his time.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah. But, and like, once again, I'm not sitting here in North America pretending like our situation is that much better. But I think it really is looking at objective markers of a civilization, of a people that, with the structure, when you have an Indian prime minister, some sort of Indian or Pakistani mayor of London, take marching orders from Washington, D.C., the colony that rebelled against you and asserted its dominance over you, and then you look at all the other peoples and the just international bazaar that the entire city of London has become, and to the point where the English people, the Scottish people, the British people, let's just call them, are completely under the thumb. They are the second-class citizens. They are the ones who are lorded over in their own homeland, the island that they have prided themselves on being isolated from the rest of the continent, safe from foreign threats for generations, have voluntarily given themselves over to governance to more or less all their major former colonies. And like I said, the inclination may be to laugh, but it is just kind of a sad story at the end of the day.
Oh, it's totally tragic. I mean, these people ruled half the world at one point. I mean, look at the state of British youth, for example. Look at when the Queen died. The absolute mind-numbing celebration. And here's the thing. Yes, I'm not a big, I mean, it's ironic how they blamed, the Queen for all the evils and ills of colonialism when she really was like the manager of the decline of the British crown. Really.
Yeah, it's ironic.
I was gonna say British crown. That was a Freudian slip, right?
Yeah.
No, but like in the fact that when she died, I remember there was this tweet by Julius, one of my best mutuals. He said something along the lines of, when that one tweet that blew up about like all the people in Gambia, in Zimbabwe, in Ireland, and in this place, in Canada, in that place, the North American indigenous people, like all these people are celebrating the Queen dying, and he said something like the price of rejecting the gifts of European civilization is the like global giga longhouse favela planet forever. So it's like I feel like brilliant. And of course, like there was another Amarnite who posted a picture of the favela, quote tweeting that. He said, "These are the millions." And I'm like, oh god, oh boy. But before I get myself in even more trouble,
no, please do.
That these are the millions. No, I think it's the Queen dying has, of course, an immense effect on the British psyche, despite like the average young Briton or not like the average young person in the UK not particularly caring, apart from a minority. But I feel like that was what tied Britain to its legacy. It tied it to its post-war 20th century history. And, you know, Charles, there was a moment there where people on the right wing, especially in Britain, were like, well, he's actually secretly based in trad. He read Cunyan. You know, it's like, maybe, I don't know. But I feel that Charles was always like a stillborn royal because of people that hated him to begin with, right? Like with Diana was like the, you know, oh my God, she was like, oh, the media queen, right? The media princess. So Charles was never going to be respected as a royal on the level of his mother.
If anybody was going to manage to decline better than Elizabeth, it would have been Diana.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, God.
Unfortunate turn of events, though. You know, I think that it's good that we brought up the Queen's death, because it was, like you say, for the uprisings in Kazakhstan in January of this year. In many ways, the death of the Queen in September feels like a long time ago, but
yeah,
it was an enormous event. Here in Canada, of course, we had it played at work. All the TVs were running anything that had to deal with it. I will say this. I do think it's like I had some empathy for the British watching that.
Yeah,
I could see how important it was. I mean, there's that rivalry between the Americans and the British, and the Americans cannot come to terms with that. The British have much better beer, better food, better cheese. They actually have real cheese in Britain.
Better food.
But do they have cheese caves in Missouri? They do not.
Yeah, the better food. That's pushing it, though. That's pushing it.
You ever had like really solid bangers and beans and a meat pie? Come on. Anyhow, you're right. That one is sketchy.
Cheeseburger any day of the week, bro.
Why we are not.
Yeah, but look at me. Come on.
No, okay, but I'm just saying.
Yeah,
that
I know what you mean.
I think this. I think what I saw was just how important this was, and how poignant, basically, it made the dilemma that they are in, and they are in one hell of a dilemma.
Oh yeah.
We were talking off air about like the world de-dollarizing. And in a way, what I'm about to say is just more bad news. But, you know, I mentioned that Japan dumped over 300 billion in USD reserves. Lots of countries are doing it. China is doing it. Even some European countries are doing it. However, most are not. And the two that have increased their USDs, of course, are the British and the Belgians.
Really, I would have expected Poland.
It was a list that I saw. I can't remember all the countries, but those are the two that stood out for me, particularly because you're talking about the city of London and you're talking about Brussels, the head, the city of the EU. So it would make sense they cannot diverge, and I bring it up to highlight the topic that we're talking about. Now, so they're firmly within the American grasp, even though buying, acquiring more USDs is going to increase their inflation, not decrease it, because America has printed more USDs in the last 3 years than the last 50 or 100.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So. They do that, of course, so other countries, poorer countries who can't push back, are able to buy oil and gas with it, right? But if there's one thing that this year has taught us, is that many countries are moving away from that. A lot of people suspect now, in about a year, maybe two, that there's going to be a new reserve currency. It will probably be based on the BRICS. It will not be one country. Like it won't be the Chinese yuan or renminbi or anything like that, but the world is moving away from that, and but inflation in Europe is actually going to increase, and I think the same thing will be the case in America. And we're already seeing oil prices starting to creep back up, even though because of the price caps, Russia will completely stop selling oil to anybody with price caps 1st of February.
Now, if you will permit me to backtrack just about the Queen, think about the significance of her death, and I'll keep this brief. That this applies to the British, this applies to the Canadians, the Australians, whatever quote unquote majority white countries are still left under the rule of the British Crown, at least in a formal sense. That if you speak English, and I know this goes against sort of the principle of the show, in a sense, you are a spiritual American. You have some sort of metaphysical connection to America that cannot be broken if you have a grasp in the English language. No matter where you are, no matter where you come from, that's just an undisputed truth. And I would say one of the biggest guards against that in terms of becoming a fully spiritual American or fully metaphysical American is the fact that the British Crown, the Queen in particular, was such a monumental representation of the identity of the British and the Commonwealth that it really did set them apart, that they really did have some sort of tie to an older world that existed beyond the 1776 or the 1945 mythology of America.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I would say a lot of the big pushes you see for republicanism, both in Britain and Canada and Australia, wherever, is an attempt to make those countries fully assimilated into the American system down to a T. Because, I mean, they effectively are already, and what stands in the place right now is the monarchy. And I'm not even saying this out of a great sense of Anglophilia. I think anyone who listens to the show knows how I feel about just the English-speaking world in general, despite being monolingually English. A bit of a hypocrisy, I understand, but you'll just have to live with it. But the push you see for that is to fully Americanize these countries in a way that you could not fully Americanize, say, a country like Germany or Japan or China or Russia.
We are living in America. America is wonderful. That when you mentioned not Americanizing Germany, my mind immediately went to Ram. Even though Rammstein's like a lib band now, they have like songs about being transgender and But anyways, you know what good illustration of Britain? Have you ever watched the film Harry Brown? It was from 2009.
It sounds vaguely familiar.
It was where Michael Caine was a pensioner. He was a military veteran. He was in the Falklands.
Well, yeah,
and, yeah. His friend, like that, literally was a dramatization of what like modern Britain is now, where you have like lonely and disparate, like lonely, desperate pensioners rotting away in tenement house, council flats. You have vicious youth gangs, heroin zombies. It's depressing, but like the griminess of it, and the desperation I feel was like It was exaggerated in that film, but when you look at like a lot of the condition of especially like those quote unquote Little Englanders, I don't know what the future holds for the UK. I think that maybe Ireland has certainly embraced its new like global empire identity. Scotland, we all know as well. But in terms of like the real British people, like not to say that they're not all part of the UK, they're not part of the same common ethnogenesis, but I mean like Britain, like Anglo. I don't know what the future holds for the Anglo in that region of the world, in the island. I mean, I think 2022 is like a lot of things, really a watershed year.
Yes.
For continental Europe, for Britain, because remember, Britain was always, there was continental Europe and then there was Britain. There was the UK.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So standing atop, right? So I think that like most things this year, we'd entered a space of liminality. Now this sort of newer like what is a British person? It's someone speaking Urdu in London, living in a council
it's
flat.
cheddar, man.
But and sort of the older, like the actual like quote unquote Little Englanders, you know, I have an immense sympathy and feeling for the sons of the British Empire, the sons and daughters of the
I mean,
British.
I think the feeling for them, of course, is I think it's mostly there because you became acutely aware of it was watching the ceremony over the burial of the Queen.
Yeah.
It was just the amount of history and the amount of ceremony, and just nothing like that exists in Canada and America.
Nope. Nope.
And that is, I think, where our, you know, where sympathy comes from for them, because like you say, 2022 is one of the most pivotal years in a century. And it's ironic that, you know, the Queen dies in this year as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost like the British were burying themselves in some way. And I know, like, a lot of people in Britain will be like, no, who fucking cares about the Queen? But, like, come on, like, deep down within the unconscious.
Not caring about the Queen won't change the situation for the better.
Exactly.
You know?
I think on a higher spiritual level, even, it won't change the situation.
No.
That was burying an integral part of what made you what you were. That history, that legacy, that the empire, for all of its rights and its wrongs. And, you know, God knows on political right, even we love to blame the Anglo for everything. But really, for different reasons on the, you know, the third worldists. The third worldists. But I love how Michael Savage popularized that, the third world. But you know, despite the American chauvinism and despite like blaming the Anglos for everything, you have to realize that for good or for bad, I mean, the history and the immensity of how the Anglo, the sort of Germano-Anglo aspect of European civilization, how integral that was, just as integral as us Mediterraneans, I would say. If not more so. Well, I wouldn't say more so. Recently, yeah, within the past few hundred years, more so, obviously. Us Mediterraneans, we sort of, in typical Med fashion, we sort of, you know, sat back and like, oh, you know, we had it. You guys can do it.
Took a nice little siesta.
Yeah, it's a nice little siesta of civilization. But no, that's what I mean. Like, you have to realize the immensity of that and the fact that the Queen was such a representation, but then the media narrative, as most things in 2022, the fully realized digitality to everything. The media online narrative was that this hideous creature of the colonialism was finally dead. And now, like, you know, stadiums in Ireland and the Congo and, you know, everywhere can celebrate. You know, it's like, that was I was actually genuinely shocked. I thought when, like, years ago, when I thought the Queen was finally going to die, that there would be that ceremony. There would be that sort of recognition of like, this is our, you know, this is history that had an impact on the world, right for wrong. But I honestly, I was flabbergasted at the sort of the mocking and the jeering and the celebration of the Queen's death. I was like genuinely shocked because I thought she had become a cultural symbol rather than a representation of British royalty, if you know what I mean. Like
I mean, the arguments are literally from the 90s and the early 2000s. Like, you're not even living in that world anymore.
Yeah.
You know, giving a shit about like whether there's a queen, or hating the fact that Britain has a queen that was like, you know, completely ineffectual, and, you know, that long march of Parliament eventually overtaking the crown.
Yeah.
In terms of power, it's a subdued castle. Like, you're still whining about that. Like, what you think if she disappeared? Like, the Tories would give you that money, or Labour would give you that money. Like, like, what do you
the Queen dies, welfare amnesty.
We're gonna get rich.
Jeremy Corbyn,
it's so asinine.
You know about Britain being forced to mine coal? You know who the real fault is for the energy crisis in Britain? Margaret Thatcher.
Oh yes.
Because she fucked over the coal miners.
Yeah.
So she's at fault once again. See the ghost of Maggie finally rising from the grave to screw over
the Welsh were right again.
Dove Fielding got punished. Remember Dove Fielding. No, but apart from the Kremlin, of course, we all know that Maggie Thatcher was a Kremlin operation at the time to suppress the North Irish. That's why. So, see, we could just like link all world conspiracies to the Kremlin, Peter Thiel, and and Maggie Thatcher. So, Ronald Reagan, puppet of Maggie Thatcher, the ergo puppet of the Kremlin. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Did
you know that?
That he was a neocon extension of the true communists, Ronald Reagan. When he said Gorbachev tear down this wall, he meant Gorbachev standing back and standing by. Man, that's crazy. Someone will rate that alternative history.
I'm sold.
Well, I mean, speaking of alternative history, like, I know we've been going on and on about the war, but I still see ridiculous takes. Like, I saw one 2 days ago where two different guys, granted, they're just people responding on Telegram. And, you still have the Gladio right. Ukraine has to win this war. I don't support Zelensky, but Ukraine has to win this war because then we can change the elites in Russia. And then after that, we'll change the elites in the West. And I'm thinking, like, are you insane? Like, and it's funnily enough, these people are just like one step away from those people who think like the war in Ukraine is fake. Like, they're just doing it because you're so smart. You figured it out. They have to do these wild, like, because you're so powerful after COVID. You stopped everything.
Kefevi, you'll get it. Kefevi.
Yeah, they're afraid of people waking up. So it's that kind of a mindset.
So special and
it's
important.
tuned a little differently, but a lot of them do believe it's fake as well, because it's just two different bad elites that
are fighting each other.
Who are fighting each other. So in some respects, the war is also, the way they see it, is fake. But if we win, then we can remake the West. Yes, yeah. because the West, because America winning will make them more right wing. Like, the less enemies neoliberalism has, the less neoliberal they'll become. It's so ridiculous.
Oh my god! Fuck! I'm sorry, bro. Oh my god! No, because neoliberalism just creates enemies within. It's you. You're the enemy. You fucking You fucking stupid asshole. You're the enemy. They vanquish their enemies from without, so they just create enemies within. I'm sorry, I'm wigging out. Maybe you'll have to cut that, Constantine.
No, not at all. That is staying.
No. It's authentic geo. Our listeners love it. Yeah, that's how crazy they are. That's how crazy they are. Like,
so neoliberalism, if we get rid of the neoliberals, they win.
Yeah,
if the neoliberal world order is takes an L, really it's a W for them.
No, what there's like if the neoliberal order prevails in Ukraine,
right,
then the neoliberal order will die.
Yeah.
That's how insane they are.
See, like, the only way to truly defeat them is if you love them.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm quoting The Believer again.
It's literally like Trudeau saying a few years ago,
if you kill the terrorists, they win.
Took the words right out of my mouth. I was just about to bring that up.
They win, right? It's the whole premise is governed by their emotional thinking, and they cannot come up with like a rational argument for it, right? Like, it would be better to just say, listen, I'm emotional, I'm a European, I know everything that my civilization has been on, the course that it's been on, is absolute shit.
Yep.
But
we have no relevance on the world stage anymore.
I can't help it. You know what I hate more than global homo? Russians. Like, at least just say that instead of the elites from both sides are doing this because they hate us. But if we win, or rather, if my elites win, my elites will then give up power and let me run this. It's like, you're insane. You're completely insane.
Buddy, you are the cannon fodder.
This is why you lose all the time.
What were you going to say, Constantine?
Buddy, you are the cannon fodder. That's what these people are. It's like, I mean, that is the. Look, just to localize Ukraine, that's the entire point of like Azov, Tornado, whatever. That, look, okay, yeah, great, you're these far right fasci guys, but you know what? The Kiev government is sending you on the front lines to be the bullet shields. That is your entire purpose for existence.
To secure a future for gay marriage in Ukraine.
Your sacrifice will be in vain, as a matter of fact.
No, but it's funny you remind me of that, Constantine, because that's a recent talking point of a lot of these leftoids, is that their argument, their cope now, is that actually the Z-Man regime, they're doing their own de-Austrian painterifying by just essentially sending all those far-right groups to the front line to die, and therefore they're quote-unquote dismantling the far-right element from the Ukrainian military. First of all, are you fucking insane? Do you know how far up the crack of the Ukrainian military that Reichsvector and Svoboda are? Like, are you fucking, like, that's insane. And now that they're talking about replacing Zaluzhny, do you know who's going to replace Zaluzhny? It's not going to be a liberal. It's going to be someone even more fanatical. If the rumor is that if they lose Bakhmut, then Zaluzhny is gone, more or less. But
not Zelensky, but Zaluzhny.
The general Zaluzhny.
The general, the general will be
this is
also,
like
we should mention that Azov historically made a visit to Israel. They were there from December the 16th for 9 days. They were even in the Knesset.
Is that true, or is that propaganda?
No, it's not propaganda.
Oh no, it's real. You can look it up.
Oh my god.
I hope that Russians now realize, like, how little, like, Jews actually really care.
Hold on, let me get the image. Let me get the image. There's the image.
Where is it?
Yeah.
Don't worry, I have it on screen. You won't be able to see it because I'm not screen sharing on the call. But it's the we'll show those fascists and their Judeo-Masonic masters their place.
I've worked with him for so long, I can see it.
What image is it?
Here, I'll see if I can send it to the Skype thing. But it's that Russian officer after Crimea got annexed, and he's just saying, "We'll show those fascists and their Judeo-Masonic masters their place."
Oh, no, but what were you saying about, like, the people in Israel? They really don't care about this anymore. How's that?
Well, yeah, situation? I mean, they're well aware of their history during World War II and in Ukraine. Okay, and I'm just saying they obviously can tweak the narrative because what they say about that is the only thing that matters. No one else's opinion.
They're not real Austrian Painter fans. That's just a band, a black metal band sort of thing. They're not really.
I'm just saying they can contradict themselves, just the way neoliberalism contradicts itself all the time. For, like, whatever pressing issue is challenging them at that time, they will jettison that entire narrative. And I just hope that Russians actually wake up, like, to that and just understand, because they already have internalized that, like, Nazism is bad because it killed Russians.
Yeah.
Like, and that isn't to say, okay, that Sovietism didn't kill them either, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's make that clear too. But I just hope but we're not talking about that. We're talking about, like, what is currently happening. So I just hope they realize it. That if, that Israel will abandon that narrative if it means that they can subdue Russia.
I
Which
see what you're
was
saying,
an area of agreement with them for so long. And so, I hope they finally snap
Even when
out of that.
Putin
And
went
I think they have. I think they have.
Well, even when Putin went to the Knesset, they talked about their common enemy of the
Yeah, that's all
nuclear ideology.
that's all over, right? It
Yeah,
doesn't
that's done for.
it doesn't matter.
No.
It doesn't matter. So I hope they understand that. And
I remember, I think
Yeah.
it was shortly before the war, it was one of those instances, Putin was doing something related to World War II, and all these Jewish media outlets, the Ford, Haaretz, all the usual suspects talking about how Putin is weaponizing anti-fascism.
Oh, I saw that article. I was gonna write something about that. Yeah, that he's the real anti-Semite because he's apparently those guys in Azov are still doing like I don't think here's the thing. To be totally fair
Yes.
to the Austrian painter fans in Ukraine, not all of them are comfortable or cool. It's not like a conspiracy. It's just they feel like they have to take funding from where they can get. So maybe the higher command, who knows? But apparently, like there's also a disagreement when it comes to like religion. Like a lot of them are pretty much Orthodox, but then there's like
they have pagan
faction that's pagan. Like they're still doing their pagan ritual. There's their
the lead of it is pagan.
Oh, the
right?
leadership?
Yeah, but I mean,
okay.
So there's like the original Azov regiment, Azov battalion, right? And then there are battalions within the territorial defense division that are also called Azov that are not part of that group.
Yeah,
and yes, and I hate saying it, it's not a monolith, but most of the people involved in it in the leadership roles are not like they are they fit the bill of what you would call like what a leftoid would call a fascist is what I'm saying. Right. But again, the liberal order, for instance, will tolerate that, right? They'll make up all kind, like libs will make up excuses about the way the alt-right made up excuses in 2017, right?
Right.
Because they know, like for them, the deeper threat to their global dominance is Russia, and so
the quote unquote real fascists. Russia.
Right.
Well, it's the exact same thing they did with the quote unquote moderate opposition in Syria. I'm referring more so to the neocons right now, where it's like, sure, there may be bad guys within their ranks, but isn't Saddam worse? Isn't Assad worse? Isn't Gaddafi worse? Where it's like, oh yeah, we acknowledge that these people are allegedly the same ones that were fighting in Afghanistan, that they may have Al-Qaeda ties, but at the end of the day, I think this was specifically from the Hillary email leaks, well, at the end of the day, although they're Al-Qaeda, isn't Assad worse?
Even though they wanted G-word-eyed all Christians in Syria. Isn't Assad worse, though? So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. Like, that's this, I think, the cynicism of the regime. But I noticed that domestically, though, the right wing, the dissident right is enemy number one, though. That's what I think the American dissident right needs to internalize, is that abroad they can have their fancy symbols and their rituals, and they could have like, quote unquote based world politics. But when it comes to within the borders of all of North America, Canada and America equally,
and Europe,
and Europe, and
Western Europe.
Yeah, because the Nouveau Droit and other like identitarian groups, they also experienced huge crackdowns after 2017. Not just the American alt-right, but those people as well. The ones that were going after the migrants, like with the protests, they were immensely cracked down on. They were jailed. The spectacle of it, I mean, what happened with Lawrence Southern, I mean, you could look back on it as being like kind of hilarious, but that was a real thing. That was, there's people to this day that say that like Lawrence Southern caused the death of migrants because of like going on a boat at night.
Giving her far too much credit, might I add, but do continue.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a particular fan, but I mean, it's just ridiculous.
I know. I just had to make the joke. The opportunity presented. I couldn't pass it up.
Just breaking balls here, breaking balls. But I think, but when it comes to domestic politics, the dissident right in America, in North America and Europe is enemy number one. They're not allowed to have their Gladio nationalist group unless they go over to fight for Ukraine.
Yeah. What's funny about this year is that this year made that abundantly true. Constantine and I have been making that point for several years, and now anyone who's paying attention understands that now fully, completely.
100%. And that's what I mean. Like in some ways it's a revival of the 90s militia like anti-militia politics that Bill Clinton fumbled. And I think that cracking down on the truckers was an extension of this as well, albeit on a much more moderate scale in Canada. There's still people that come up like these, activist leftoids that come up with these schizo conspiracy theorists about like the truckers are actually, Austrian painters, all of them. And they're like harassing drag time story hours or some crap. Like I mean, you have to realize the regime, as much as they support the affectations of, enemies of their enemies abroad that have base world politics, you are not afforded such things. You are not. You will always be demonized. You will always be lied about. There will be whole narrative spun about how like I said, the truckers are evil, funded by foreign right-wing money, and they're like, about to like, there were people that were like, the trans people were like, I don't know, they were like you name it, like any sort of crazy lie will be reverberated on the state-funded media. But when it comes to, CBC fluff pieces about Ukraine, these people, like, either they're not real Austrian painter fans, or if they are, they're fighting a cause that is much greater, that is like, the Kremlin actually is like funding global fascism. Like it's
yeah, see, I mean, this is what I mean about the Gladio right and within the dissident right. Like, like basically, that is a synopsis of what happened to them, right? Like, you're only valuable to me as long as you're fighting this battle. Once this battle is over, I have to lock you up.
Yeah.
Like you literally are a criminal that I'm using to fight my battles.
You're a straw battalion, more or less.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see that, just to go back, we were talking about, might be a more interesting question to ask, what took the West so long to start this war, to provoke this war? Yeah. Part of it is because it's unwilling to fight a large-scale war with Russia, and in many ways, Ukraine is ideal because of that, because there's an alibi there. But moreover, without Ukraine, like the right was not something that you could motivate as a force up until this year, even though there were currents within it that could be. But generally speaking, the dissident right could not be motivated to go fight Russia until Ukraine came along. Yeah. Right. And even then, most of them are just supporting Ukraine, emotionally, morally. They're not actually going there.
And then I think they didn't anticipate as well, like, the huge section of the dissident right that was either ambivalent to it or like outright supports Russia. Because then, of course, to account for that, then they have the leftoid activist groups to then launder that sort of fake lineage that the Kremlin's funding the far right in the West. Yeah. Even though the Kremlin could not care about them. So really the regime has both accounts counted for. The one part of the dissident right where there's pro-Ukraine Gladio nationalism, and the other part that doesn't go along with it, well, they'll just be demonized by the left anyways as being like funded by the Kremlin. But also another thing too, when it comes to the readiness of the West, and when it comes to the buildup, for example, with military technology in the past 20 years, basically being geared for the, fake nonsense, quote unquote, war on terror. And the fact that most American equipment is like high tech, flashy, but also very hard to produce in very low quantities because they didn't need large quantities. So maybe, Constantine, you could probably comment on this. The reintroduction 2022 was the big year for the reintroduction of industrial warfare on a huge industrial, military industrial complex scale. The rejuvenation of the military industrial complex in the year 2022, which, there was that one, I believe, what's the top British one, Journal for Military Studies or something, that said, essentially Russia's reintroducing the military industrial complex, that the technology and the way that troops are trained to combat insurgents and so forth, and in the Middle East, that these tactics were severely tested in Ukraine. Ukraine very much is a conventional 20th century war.
Oh yes, and what we have is actually a bit of a.
Go ahead, Constantine.
What we have is actually a bit of a regression, because you're touching one of my autism buttons right now, and this is something I've gotten into in depth in some of the early episodes of the War Report. So, what you saw in places like Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, etc., was this fourth generation warfare, this guerrilla warfare that really blurred the lines between soldier and civilian. Where does war start?
Global
and where does
policing
it
action.
end? Yes, getting exactly into that, and sort of the asymmetrical military operations Iran would take, and with the seizing of the tankers. But with this war, you've actually had a regression to third-generation warfare, which is the fully mechanized industrial warfare that you may think of, World War II, Korea, etc. But even in some cases, you've gotten a regression to a second-generation war, which is this long, drawn-out trench warfare. The front doesn't move very much throughout the course of prolonged campaigns. And probably the most recent example we have of that, of course, World War I is probably the most famous example. The most recent example is the Iran-Iraq War.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to just outright say both Russia and Ukraine are vastly more competent than both Iran and Iraq were in the 1980s. But it is almost a replay of that war, where you do have one nation that is significantly power than the other, but the other nation is nothing to sneeze at, and they are forced to participate in what is more or less a slugfest. Now, if Russia were to hypothetically dedicate more troops, more resources, etc., that could tip the balance, but with the way the war has played out thus far, all I can think of, all I can really compare it to, is the Iran-Iraq war on a much larger and more serious scale.
Yeah. I mean, Iran-Iraq, well, there was key differences. I mean, the human wave attack thing.
Yeah, despite media narratives, that has not happened in this war yet. Now, I'm not discounting that, especially from the Ukrainian side, but when it comes to this long, drawn-out slugfest, which I think this war is ultimately going to be, unless there is some sort of major winter offensive, which I also do think is reasonably within the cards. I won't say definitively, but with that being said, it has shown that, to go back to the cliche, war hasn't really changed, and despite what we thought going into the 21st century, despite many of the conflicts, even conflicts with major powers involved, like Syria, like Libya, like Afghanistan, they do not resemble this fourth generation warfare that even I fell victim to, that even I thought was going to be the future of warfare. Now, I still think there will be a great degree of fourth generation warfare, particularly from the United States. One thing I think we're going to see a lot more of as American power slips is that the U.S. Navy will become the largest pirate organization in the world after a certain point, that when their economic tools are starting to be exhausted, they will use hard power. They will use more blockades. They will seize ships. I mean, we've already seen them seize a number of Iranian tankers over...
That's what ended the Iran-Iraq War.
Oh, yeah, and that's what ended the Iran-Iraq War back in the 80s, back at arguably the height of American power. And then with the more recent disputes with Iran back in 2018, 2019, 2020, especially related to the Syria conflict, you saw Americans seizing Iranian tankers and vice versa. So, although unrelated to the direct Russian-Ukrainian war, I mean, given the rate at which it could expand, you could see something that could affect this, but I think there's a very real possibility, in how maybe the grain shipments that are supposed to be coming out of Russia may affect this, of state-sponsored piracy by the United States. And I really don't see a possibility that prevents that within the course of at least the 2020s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But shall we go over the various battles, or that would be too much?
I mean, I think this is more like we'll keep it more of a year in review show. I mean, as far as I know, like most of the lines are static, even from the show.
No, I mean like in the whole year. I mean like when they took Mariupol.
Oh yes,
and,
yes, yes. Yeah, we could do that.
Maybe that would just be tedious.
I think there's certainly room for it, but I did want to get into some of the retrospective on what happened in the Middle East this year, because although it was a much more marginal theater than it's been in recent years, recent decades, there was still quite a bit that happened, particularly with Turkey and particularly with Iran. And this is really the first year we've seen Syria take as much of a backseat as it did. Now, you could argue 2020 was when Syria started to take a backseat in the public consciousness, even on our show. But I would say 2022 really solidified that, especially with Syria's main sponsor, that being Russia, embroiling itself in another conflict far closer to home. But Turkey, the country that has been the middleman for years now, that has played itself between the two power blocks, has very much, not entirely, but very much solidified itself with Russia for the time being, given the gas hub deal. And
what Erdogan said just 2-3 days ago.
I know he said quite a few things, but give me some specifics.
Yeah, he said the West is to blame for the escalation of this war and for not being able to find a peaceful resolution.
Yes, that.
Yeah.
And then he also made
a pretty big statement.
He also made arguably just as big concerning the civic religion of the American Empire, some anti-LGBTQ CIA statements saying that this is not for Turkey and this is against our values. But with him outright coming out and blaming the West for the war, that is very much in line with the rhetoric of what you expect from a firebrand like Orban, which Erdogan, I'm not going to compare the two, but given the similar position they're in, you can see how those sort of things start to line up. But he has very much moved to align himself with Russia, despite the fact that at the beginning of the war, it did look very uncertain what he was going to do with this, because he was, in the lead up to the war and in the opening phase of the war, visiting Kiev in constant talks with Zelensky, and what generally seemed like a very pro-NATO line after years of going head-to-head with the Western powers over...
Especially during the migrant crisis.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And even going back to 2020 with the threatening the release in the wave of migrants, picking fights with France, the works. But early on in the war, as to be expected, he played a very pro-Ukrainian line that has drifted more neutral and is now becoming tacitly, or, at least to some degree, somewhat favorable to Russia. I'm not going to say entirely favorable to Russia, considering the dynamics between the two countries, whether that has to do with the current conflict in the Caucasus or in Syria, or even some of the disputes over the Bosphorus and the shipment of grain outside of the country with the halting of the Russian tankers over insurance disputes. So, the Turks, that is, have once again proven themselves to be an invaluable player in all of this. They have proven themselves to be very much a kingmaker in virtually all of the surrounding regions, that they have a great sway, whether that be with Russia and Ukraine just north of them, whether that be with the Armenian-Azerbaijan situation, whether that be with Syria or Iran, or even increasingly looking eastward with China, and of course with none other than NATO and the Western powers. That, although we've harped on this before, although Erdogan has always played every side he can, I would say this is the first real year we've seen him start to approximate what you could call a kingmaker, a position that is probably only going to increase soon, something that's probably even going to go more into his favor soon. The fact that he is able to pick and choose winners and losers, in maybe not every context, but in a great deal of contexts.
What's the the Turkish drone situation like? Because
It's
remember he
not
was.
there.
Oh my God, really?
They don't
Because
even they don't even sell them to Ukraine anymore. The Russians just
oh,
basically
God,
yeah.
'cause I was gonna say that now that he's playing footsie with Putin, I mean,
No,
you
I mean that
yeah.
stopped months ago.
Oh my God. Because no, because that was the big thing. That was the hype of like the dollar
Yeah.
store Turkish drone that their Turkish equivalent of Elon Musk was like sending to Ukraine by the boatloads, like literal boatloads. But now that he's like more or less,
But
at least being
the
amicable with
problem is that
Putin.
the Russians just basically figured out how to knock them out. Like
Oh, okay. Yeah.
like eventually their S-300 and 400 systems began knocking them out.
Yeah, they had a lot of practice in Syria first. Don't forget that as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the offensive at the beginning was rushed and very disorganized. They did have, despite them saying otherwise, apparently some amount of conscripts that were thrown in. I don't, that's whatever the case is, whether that's true or not. The point is they went into territories that were outside the effective range of S-300 systems, and that made them sitting ducks. But the Ukrainians just basically gave up because their drones would just get destroyed. Now, they still will throw out a drone here or there.
Yeah.
But the reason Erdogan stopped supplying them the drones is because the reputation of the Bayraktar was ruined. Right?
Mm.
Like those drones are still effective against a power like Armenia, but they're no longer effective against Russia.
Yeah.
And despite Ukraine having S-300s of their own, they're not able to do very much about the Iranian supplied drones and the homemade Russian Lancet drone. So
yeah. No, but that's what I mean. That was a big selling point for like Turkey's like already frayed relationship with Kiev. Of course, like the Western propaganda is that like, Ukraine's winning the drone war and the Lancet's useless. It's like nothing, and
Well,
Iran
Ukraine
will
has
be
an
able to produce drones.
ace up its sleeve every time, whether that be the drones, whether it be the HIMARS, which they apparently only got 18 of, the javelins.
Yeah.
Who could forget the javelins? Or the MiGs. Why are we not sending Ukraine more MiG 29s? Because that is going to be enough to change the entire course of the war if they just have MiG 29s. And every time it was always some super weapon up Ukraine's sleeve that
Yeah.
the Russians are done for now. We got the javelins. The Russians are done for now. We have the NLAWs. The Russians are done for now. We have the HIMARS. And you can go down an
Patriot
entire
missiles now.
oh, of course the who could forget about the wonderful Patriot missile? That is the game changer. That is going to change it. Russia's running out of missiles. Ukraine is on the move. Crimea retaken within 6 months. Ukrainian troops in Moscow within a year. The Russian state dissolved in 18 months. And you see, it's the greatest dream of... Hell, I don't even know what to call these people anymore. The delusional. Let's just call them that, because there's really no better way to describe them at
the
this
NAFO
point.
people.
Oh,
like
disgusting.
Z-Man and Biden are gonna walk hand in hand into Moscow in 6 months.
Yeah, they're gonna officiate the first gay wedding in Moscow. It's gonna be a beautiful.
They're gonna get Dylan Mulvaney to come and officiate.
Oh no! It's gonna be a beautiful tear-jerking sight, and the rainbow and NATO flags are going to be hoisted over the Kremlin in the final defeat of the.
And they're gonna remake the photo from the fall of Berlin with the communist flag overhead, and only it's like above the Kremlin.
And of course it's a gay flag.
Yeah, but it's got the trans and the Black Lives Matter strips on it too.
And it's got that new little umbrella thing they put in there, because that's apparently the what's that, Pride Flag 4.0 at this point? I've lost track. But it's
next generation Pride Flag warfare.
That's it's
oh man.
This is how these people truly think, and it's honestly sad to even try to put yourselves in their shoes and trying to realize that there are people who actually actually do think like this. But yes, all the Ukrainian aces up their sleeves have thus far led to a moderately successful counteroffensive before things quite literally froze over. So we'll see. We'll see how that works. I mean, at this point, the Ukraine is just a black hole of both money and arms. Any country that isn't the U.S. or Turkey, and even again, Turkey is on, let's just say, very poor footing with Ukraine right now, has run out of military supplies in any great amount to send to Ukraine at this point. So these small European statelets have been completely stripped dry of their arsenals. You had Poland sending half their tank fleet. These countries are bending over backwards, and thus far, although the counteroffensives were embarrassing for Russia, don't get me wrong, in terms of what they've actually retaken, it's pretty negligible, and it's by no means enough to change the tide in Ukraine's favor now. Maybe a few months ago you could argue that was the case. Maybe a few months ago you could argue things were much worse for Russia, but now that things have stagnated and frozen over, given the long-term vision of this, it was somewhat marginal, I think is probably the best way to put this, but it's becoming more of a money suck, and the question is, what's the breaking point of these states? Now, we discussed last episode not only the discontent on a grassroots level, but the discontent on a policy level from countries like Hungary, like Croatia, like Austria, and Slovakia, even to an extent, and how, as these small nations that aren't necessarily pro-Russia, but certainly aren't pro-Ukraine, continue to grow, as the exasperation continues to grow, and really you only have the Western powers, the proper Western European powers, Poland, the Baltic states, and maybe countries like Romania or something standing behind it. It's a question of when rather than if these small states will peel off, and what the response of the American Empire will be to countries like Hungary and Slovakia and Croatia and Austria starting to turn their back on this war effort, or at least taking a more nuanced stance on this war effort.
Yeah. And who knows, I think going into 2023, if that sort of fissure between the official NATO line and these countries is going to widen, maybe, if things get bad enough, obviously economically.
And yeah, especially with the economics, I'll say once again, I stick to my prediction. Winter 2023 in these next few months probably isn't going to be the day of reckoning, so to speak, but it's going to put a dent in Europe that they will likely not recover from anytime in the near future, and then that will only be compounded by subsequent crises, whether that be in 2023 or whether that be in the years to come. But it does fall really on how do the European people respond to this. Does this lead to a surge of protests across Europe that secures the resignations of governments, such as what we possibly saw in 2018 before the Yellow Vests were really cracked down on? Does this result in a cracking of the whip by the regimes that are currently in power and bringing the people in line and bringing them even more suppressed? But it really just depends on the domestic affairs, I would say, of France and Germany in particular, but European nations as a whole. And I think Germany, given how much it is under the boot of the United States, is a bit of a tougher nut to crack. And given France's skepticism of NATO and the American-led order as it is, now I'm not saying that there's some sort of Russophile faction within the French elite that's going to reforge the French-Russian alliance of old and partition Europe. As wonderful as that sounds, I don't think that's going to happen anytime in the near future. But it does make you wonder if there will be room for governments or for pressure on said governments to give way to some sort of at least more moderate position on this conflict, where they take a more measured approach and realize that we can't keep charging into the meat grinder on behalf of Ukraine. We can't keep economically sacrificing ourselves on behalf of Ukraine, regardless of what the American empire says. Now, of course, there was that fear-mongering piece in The Hill talking about, will the U.S. abandon Ukraine like Afghanistan? And once again, we did touch on this in the previous episode, that Afghanistan is going to be this cudgel for the American public conscience for the near future, that we can't let another country be like Afghanistan. We can't abandon them to the forces of evil like how we left Afghani women who were sure to become doctors and lawyers.
Poor women!
Yeah, to the mercy of the Taliban. The one women's school in Afghanistan shut down. It's 20 years of progress undone. It's truly it's more harrowing than whatever the German people will face this winter when it comes to blackouts and resource shortages and the elderly and the weak succumbing to their conditions because they can't have proper heating and lighting in their homes. Yes, but we have to worry that the 20 women enrolled in Afghan higher education might not be able to get their nuclear engineering degrees. That's the real travesty in all of this.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. The Germans are collectively evil, anyways.
Oh, of course.
So,
Morgenthau was right. Not only the Germans, but the entire European people need to atone for their past crimes, and they deserve to freeze in the winter. They deserve to have their elderly and young children and weak succumb to winter conditions and food shortages because they're Europeans. Who gives a shit about Europeans? And but you see, Afghan women, all 20 of them that actually made it into higher education, we need to protect the next Rosa Parks within the Afghan school so she can make a real difference in the world.
Yeah. Well, now in Ukraine, I mean, if there's one, trans man in Kiev that can't, get top surgery, it's terrible. So, oh, that's why people have to die. Like, see, that's what I mean. Like, this is so, like, we do joke about it, but really, I mean, the monumental evil that was unleashed this year has just been incredible.
Oh, and we haven't seen the end of it. It is just beginning, and I don't think a lot.
I know.
I don't think a lot of people consciously understand it. I think if you really push them, they do understand it. You could get them to admit it, but I don't think that's at the forefront of most people's mind yet. And even I'm talking about very intelligent people who agree with us. I just don't think it registers for a lot of people yet. And even to a degree, it doesn't register to me. Thinking about Europe falling into second world or even sub-second world conditions does seem like still a bit of an abstract concept to me, even though we're very realistically on the brink of that over the next 18 months. But it still doesn't quite mentally click with me. But some people I don't even think have made that initial connection. Again, I don't fault them. I'm not insulting their intelligence. I'm just saying it's quite the thing to come to terms with.
But I think to play devil's advocate, though, there are people that talk about how during the protests, how people were talking about food shortages in the West and how that didn't happen. But inflation certainly has, especially here in Canada. But to play devil's advocate, some people are saying that, like, nothing's happening. Europe will still heat itself next winter, not this winter, but they'll heat themselves this winter, but even next winter, they'll still have enough heat. There won't be people that will grow poor in continental Europe. That's just like schizo. Take your meds. You're a Paul cell.
Well, you see, there's a kernel of truth in that, actually, because it reminds me of a report that came out probably about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, somewhere in that time frame, that Germany can now meet its energy needs for the winter, but that coincides with a mass exodus of industry from the country. Sure, you might be able to keep the lights on, but how are you going to pay to keep those lights on?
They'll have energy, but they won't have an industry.
Yeah, that's
they
wonderful.
Won't freeze to death, but they'll probably have to choose between food and healthcare or whatever.
I saw, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if it was Bloomberg or not, but there was an economist who said that he expects blackouts in Britain before the end of winter.
Man.
So look, they had a year. Everybody who's been following, the events of 2022 very closely, is fully aware that they've had a year to fill up their reserves, their underground reserves. They unfortunately had to pay in rubles, and that all stops. That won't happen in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And but the cost to replace that energy is 4 times what they were paying. So even without industry, it will cost a lot. The standard of living will decrease significantly, and Europe will no longer have any autonomy. And there's something I'd like to add. I meant to say this earlier, but one of the dynamics between Russian and European relations, particularly around the issue of culture and gas, and that is the Europeans, at least not all of them, but at least some of them, look down on the Russians as if all they can supply the world is gas and oil. It's a shame that Europe, who is so much more sophisticated and accomplished than Russia, doesn't have, but should have, the gas and oil. What's interesting, I think now, and that I think fed into the Russian mindset of inferiority versus the Americans and the Europeans. However, with the European market gone, they will be selling gas to people that ostensibly are their peers. That the Russians, in some instances, the Russians will look down upon them. Right? Like that's a really important distinction that's going to happen from now on. And as I said right from the beginning of the war, this isolation for Russia is actually really good. Even on the cultural level, this is actually good for Russia.
It's like how communism prevented them from like the excesses of
of degeneracy.
Degeneracy, yeah.
So I just think like now that mechanism where Europeans cope for not having energy by just looking down on the Russians who sell them.
You're Slavic, yeah.
Right, you're just selling us. That's all you got is your dirty energy. Like that's all gone now, right? And Russians are laughing. That's why they have commercials of Europeans freezing in the winter and being poor, because that is their fate. And then, you mentioned earlier in the show that Britain, in a sense, was burying itself.
Yeah.
As they buried Queen Elizabeth. Well, in many ways, there's a much slower ongoing process of Europe burying itself for having friendship with the U.S. Now, you could argue the U.S. was always going to do this to Europe because because it feels like the Marshall Plan gives them the right to rule Europe forever. And but it also demonstrates that America's not able to trust Europe anymore, right? And Europe is valuable to America on some other, on a more metaphysical level, in some respects. But I would also say in a financial respect, I don't know how much longer America can hold on and finance Europe, because America will have to.
As well.
Right. America will have to, in order to, America would have to change, particularly the Middle East, in order to give that energy to Europe. The Middle East cannot make up for all of Russian energy. And there is nothing that America can offer Saudi Arabia to pump out oil at reduced rates in order to keep Europe going. But not so much that America will ever have to worry about Europe setting up some kind of a partnership. Because I will say there were attempts for Europe to become more independent. Macron is still talking about not depending on the US for security.
Yeah.
You always have to watch it with him, because he says all kinds of things and then does nothing about it anyways, and you never know whether he's serious or not.
Things and he'll not do anything.
Yeah, and then Richard Spencer cries, but
and then they both run back to Mummy. So
yeah. So anyways,
I wish I could have married my hot teacher. Man, that'd been amazing. Not the childless part, but Anyways, go.
It's okay. The other news this year have been, of course, Musk's takeover, and
yes.
the Twitter files. I told you guys that in many ways, what preceded the Twitter files were the stories by Li Fang from The Intercept.
Yes, that's right.
Right, where he was talking about the FBI working, working closely with Facebook and Twitter, monitoring everything having to do with COVID, January 6th, basically all the stuff that they're terrified about.
2021, by the way, if you were like a chronic, like, if Twitter is your hive mind as much as is mine, 2021 was an absolute slaughter, shit show for being on the dissident right on Twitter, because the Jannies like basically ran roughshod over you. And their last hurrah before Elon took over, before Elon said namaste, before he went to the subcontinent of Twitter. They were like axing people. Like, that was a huge G-word-eyed of accounts. That last sorry, Constantine, you were gonna say something? Sorry.
You just remind me of both February and March of 2021, just the absolute culling that took place. I remember. Okay, so right now I'm about at like 13, almost 1,400. I was like pushing 2,000 by the time that happened, and I have not recovered since. And then over just that, let's just say, 18, 19-month period from March 21 to today, let's say that'd be a little more. That'd be like, whatever, 21-month period. Just ever so slightly getting up just to have like 80 or so followers completely wiped away in a week. And
yeah, I remember those.
It was
Bro, I had 200
maddening.
followers wiped out in one day once.
Oh, it was it was insane. And like I'm talking about people who like were completely above the board. One account I'm thinking of in particular, Salim Sizu, you may know of him, and many of the audience may know of him. He was just a massive election autist, not just for the U.S., but just all around the world. And, probably one of the nicest guys I've ever interacted with on Twitter, just to say point blank. And gone in the blink of an eye. They got him. He was private for months. He didn't even really touch too much. And, like, he was in the thick of it when it came to a lot of the, let's just say, questions around the 2020 election and the aftermath of that, but he kept things very above board. He was very careful with it.
That's what it was, though. Come on, we all know that's why.
Completely gone. Not just him, but several people who... I mean, look, there's one thing, and although I don't think this should warrant a ban, but when you go on there and just spam racial slurs, you can't really be surprised what happens.
Oh,
but,
no.
Yeah,
I mean,
but, like, I'm just saying, most of the people...
Coming back on your burner account, cum graper Shlomo 1480.
I have about a dozen or so people like that who... They constantly need to follow me all the time. In fact, I think a couple of them are Mexican, so that just confirms the stereotype, I suppose.
Arasu Lolly Graper.
Dear Lord. But getting back to the point, again, most of these people, like, while they may have had, let's just say, their spicier moments, all above board people, at least the ones I can commit to mind, but you even saw accounts that were, let's be honest, more or less just lurker accounts, people who followed, liked, and interacted, but didn't really put out their own tweets or anything like that. People were just kind of in the background, just wanted to observe the situation. Even they were getting just completely nuked. And of course, the given reason was spam and manipulation was the one. Now, there were some brief restorations in late 2021. Yeah. Then, of course, the Elon thing, they take that into complete overdrive. And, look, I don't know what the future of Twitter holds. I'm just personally not optimistic. I'm not optimistic about a lot of things, but we still have not seen retribution for, or should I say, maybe retribution's a bit harsh, but we haven't seen justice for a lot of the people who were just completely just wiped out with no due process, so to speak. And, I don't know, we were promised that there would be a mass amnesty. I'll believe it when I see it. But it was a complete and utter, like, that is probably and this may sound dramatic, this may sound a little, like I'm pushing my limits here, like I'm being a little, just a bit out there, a bit absurd. I mean, it was probably the largest case of what could be considered mass censorship within decades in this country. And
a sitting president.
Yeah.
Sitting, like, literal sitting president.
Yeah, and then
After
Trump, although they didn't go to outright bans, I think they locked one of who's the Taylor Greene, the sort of the Q lady in Congress.
Majority Taylor Greene.
Yeah, they locked
Marjorie.
Yeah, they locked her personal account, let her keep her official office account, but they would do stuff like that, and of course it trickled over into a lot of the mainstream conservative pundits. They started to get hit after a lot of the quote-unquote far-right, alt-right, neo-Nazi whatever got hit, and it inevitably, as we said, would creep over into them. I mean, hell, now I'm having flashbacks to the original purchase, 5-6 years ago, back when they got rid of Amren, Jared Taylor, stuff like that, way back at, all the stuff that happened after, let's just say, a Nuremberg in a certain Virginia town in 2017. Oh, those were good times.
Cameron Peter Griffin's back, by the way.
Oh, that's very nice. I didn't know that.
His name is Countercurrents Herbert the Pervert.
Oh,
he's a great poster.
Yeah,
I love him. He's mutual of mine.
Look, just for the name alone, I would recommend you follow this man, because just for that alone, that warrants you giving this man your attention. But yeah, it's all the way. It goes all the way back to 2017, after Trump, after Nuremberg. They really came down, and they really haven't let up since. And I suppose we have some breathing room with Elon, but once again, I'll believe the great optimist when I actually see pen put to paper.
Yeah. But I do think, I think that the censorship will continue. Certainly, whoever he appoints, won't be. There still will be people banned. You know what I mean? That's an undeniable fact. Will there be more of a transparent algorithm that won't Skinner box people? Yes. Will there be less algorithm bans? Probably. Is it, as much as people beef on him, as much as a lot of people that read him absolutely despise him now, and as much as he's a boomer con, a more racist boomer con now, Nick Land had the best take, and I think that, given his sort of, he would hate me for saying this, given his spiritual connection to the digital world, he said that the Musk takeover of Twitter was as big as the storming of Bastille. And I think that, yeah, and all these irony leftists were attacking him and going after him. But I do think that he's smart enough to see the implications of things, I would say, decades down the road. Now, I'm not just sucking him off because I want him on my podcast one day. But no,
you can do it. Don't worry. I believe in you.
Uniquely brilliant. Yeah. I think he's a uniquely brilliant mind, and I think that he saw the implications of Twitter being that data of ocean and being the public square, and what would happen if moderation wasn't as severe. What would happen if an inkling of the early internet were to be let back onto Twitter, pre-2016 Twitter. I think he was the one that saw the implications of that. And, of course, usual suspects beefing on him and saying, you're simping for a billionaire and you used to be an accelerationist, and oh my God, you're stupid. And it's whatever, oh, you're touch grass, bro. But Nick Land is incapable of touching grass, and that is what makes him brilliant. And I think he really saw the implications of it. So there you go.
Yeah, I've always liked him, and I couldn't when I was on Twitter, we were mutuals. I couldn't even believe he followed me.
Yeah, I know. Me neither.
His lecture that he gave wasn't a lecture, but an interview with what's his name? Michael Millerman has been on his show. Young fella, Justin Murphy. Yeah. I really like. I don't know how much of that is true now. I guess we could briefly touch on FTX as well. That was a.
Yeah.
But his idea of crypto currency and how it can have
nods that evade centralized power and all that. I mean, I think that's still largely true, but I hate to be black-pilled about it, but I think that's probably something that the regime is eventually going to crack or figure out. Even though other countries are going to be moving to crypto. So, maybe there's in the West, you can see that the West has become very, very brittle.
Yeah.
In the last 5-6 years, it's a very brittle place. Just if you saw today, the warnings from I believe either the Sydney or Melbourne police chief for this woman who was talking about, do you think your neighbor's a conspiracy theorist? Like, is Australia really in danger of being overthrown by a right-wing militant squad? Like, are you serious? Right.
Yeah,
And
the
of course,
Hoons are gonna overthrow them. They're gonna get radicalized by
yeah.
the Hoons that drive their souped up rice burners. They're gonna get radicalized by Joel Davis, and they're gonna overthrow.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
So you can
overthrow the
see,
government.
so it's become very brittle. Yeah, I know Joel Dave. Yeah. So it's become very brittle, and for them, they cannot even allow something like cryptocurrency. I think some of the brittleness implies that if action had to be taken in a sustained way, I'm not saying they wouldn't win. I'm just saying they're not confident they can win.
Yeah.
That's what the brittleness tells me.
But again,
That's why they're willing to look insane and contradict themselves. Like this one brought up hates, COVID conspiracies are part of hate speech. That's insane, right? Because of course, if you said, if technically what she's implying is if I said, if you take the vaccine, you can't get COVID and you can't spread COVID, because that was official policy in the first half of or the first quarter of 2000. I mean, in the first 4 or 5 months, so nearly the first half. Even Biden repeated that line. So, I mean, you could be arrested for that. Now, technically speaking, they won't. They won't. But so they're willing to look stupid, just to stop any kind of uprising. And I can't help but think they're aware that things are going to get worse, and that's why they're doing it. If not, then that seems to even more strongly imply that they're afraid that they might lose a physical challenge.
Well, it's funny you
Go
mentioned
ahead.
crypto, because again, 2022 being the seismic year, the liminal time warp, Trudeau basically wants to outright ban it. The FTX scandal, I think, is the beginning watershed moment of the impetus of governments questioning the free reign of crypto, finding ways to not just monetize it, but finding ways to subvert it, put regulations around crypto, finding ways to justify them putting regulations around crypto. This year has taken a massive hit for crypto. I mean, I basically did all those crypto heads go poor. There was a massive. I know nothing. I don't know the in and outs. I don't have any crypto, but from what I hear from crypto heads, this year has been just an absolute gong show for crypto. And again, this is sort of the moment of, well, it's speculative, funny money. It's not real, and we should regulate it because of that. It's basically like kids, I don't know, with lawn darts or some shit. It's kids with violence in video games all over again. It's or it's a CS:GO skins for Zoomers. It's we need to regulate this because kids are gonna get in trouble, or some by kids I mean 30-year-old soy body man children.
Well, to be fair, they're mentally children.
Which I am a 30-year-old man child. But other ones, not me, though.
Of course not.
Go ahead. Oh, boy. But you know what I mean. Like, this is the impetus for it. Yeah. Were you going to say, Constant?
Yeah, I was just having to go at the mentally stunted average American adult, but other than that, just the usual. But yeah,
did you read Constant? Did you read Pin the Weasel? Carolyn Allison, Pin the Weasel.
Perhaps this is a bad time to admit to this, but I only have a 3rd grade reading level. I'm a massive dyslexic. I have not read much, but in all seriousness, no, I have not read Pin the Weasel.
Oh my God, bro! The 4chan text, green text, Pin the Weasel.
Yeah, no, I
search it up right now, bro.
Oh, okay. Now
I read it on air.
Oh dear. What are?
And Prude had to mute my mic.
Okay. So
but I forgave him though. I didn't forgive the other guy that muted my mic, but I forgave Prude because he's my real friend.
Let me look this up. Okay.
It's only derailing this discussion.
No, I welcome it. That's what this kind.
She chortled.
Oh,
she chortled.
Dear Lord, I think I know what this is, but you insist. So I will give a reading of this once I can find a version that isn't just all pixels. Okay. So, is everyone ready?
Yep.
3, 2, and 1. This normies cannot understand the thrill of pinning the weasels. Night spent chasing over an effeminate Caroline around the beanbag forts, her squealing and gibbering, pouring sweat on the verge of seizing. Your friends build up an intoxicating, delirious state with Talmudic chantings at the sidelines, hitting the Caroline toy with brooms as she tries to escape. Sam would be giggling and laughing as the waves of methamphetamine pleasure seem to harmonize with the droning Hebrew verses. He runs through the beanbag maze, fat and portly, with his Viagra-powered penis and divining rod for the weasel, sweat gushing down his face and unfocused eyes as he laughs and chortles until he gasps, "Found you!" The Maths Weasel screeches defensively, but the Wankman Bankman is upon her in seconds, his penis thrusting blindly into her flank, leg, stomach, and ribs, unconcerned about anything but the motion. Eventually, serendipity finds her mouth, and the cockatoo Rowan is placated, sucking contently on Bankman's dehydrated dick.
Oh my God.
Amazing. 10 out of 10 green text. Truly an immortal 4chan product.
I agree, but I just gotta say that was a lot. That wasn't as bad as I expected it to be. I'll just leave it that way, and cherish that moment, because that is probably a once in a lifetime moment you'll get from me on this show. In my sanctuary of autism. We've defiled it just a little. Don't worry, we can recover. But to placate our guest, and I'm glad that I think it's fitting for 2022. I'll just put it that way.
That's 22 in a nutshell, right there, bro.
I think
you have a T-shirt that says "We survived 2022." It'll be a picture of Carolyn Ellison squealing on a beanbag fort. Sort of like those Bart Simpson Gulf War shirts where it's like, I went to the Gulf War and all I got was this lousy T-shirt, man.
Oh no. Oh dear.
Oh, you boys are probably old enough to remember that. Holy shit. Like, I was
how old do you think I am?
No, Goran, you remember.
Oh, I was about to say, like, how old?
If I was in America, I was literally too old to go.
Yeah. My first my first TV memory was when I was a kid. I was I must have been 3 years old or so. And I remember looking up at the TV screen and seeing those B-2 bombers going over the oil fields. I don't know why I always remember that. That and Walkerton were my two first TV memories. The Walkerton, where they zoomed in on the water tap that had the warning sign on it. Oh yeah, man. Oh,
I remember all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. remember. Do you remember? But yeah, Carolyn Ellison pinned the weasel. So the weasel squealed apparently. Now, Wankman Bankman, he's I don't know. He took a flight. He took a flight log somewhere. I don't know when they're gonna persecute him, or he's gonna,
Oi Gavalt. I'm gonna force more people to read that. I have a short list of names that I'm going to force to read that now, just because of that. Now all these people would probably put me in the ground if I ever publicized anything like that. So just because of that, I won't. But I still just need the satisfaction of having to spread this infection. So thank you very much for that.
Now, I hate to say it, but it's getting late.
Oh,
for me, anyways.
There's the boomerisms coming out.
We didn't even cover the Middle East.
We got into Turkey. We didn't get.
Yeah.
What's left? Iran. What can we realistically?
I mean, the biggest surprise is the Middle East has taken the side of Russia. Really.
Yeah.
I don't think they expected that. The Americans have tried twice. They even flew Biden there, and he still didn't get the deal that he wanted. It's not working. Iran is going to be part of a Russian free trade zone. They are building now extensive railways to connect. You have stupid like American and Western journalists saying, "Why can't we bomb them? Like, why can't we stop them?" It's like, well, because you don't have any ports in the Caspian Sea, for one. Right? Like, I mean, we're all well aware now the last 6 years of just how poor journalism is in the West.
Oh yeah.
Particularly on Twitter, the loudest voices are usually the dumbest. Yeah, I mean, for me, that was the biggest surprise. I honestly wondered, like, after the war started, like, what was the Middle East? Which side was the Middle East going to take? And I mean, the side that they're taking is really to move away from the American dollar. And then there's that massive deal because Xi Jinping, a month later, visits Saudi Arabia and he secures this huge.
Oh yes, that's right.
Huge deal with China, and he's going. Number one oil exporter to China will be Saudi Arabia, and they're not going to, they're going to exchange everything with the yuan, not with the U.S. dollar. So they understand, as long as they use the American dollar, then they are still eventually, inevitably, they're just subjects. They're clients within the American system, and the rebellion is contained. But by doing this, they're aspiring to something far more. So that's really been, the story of the world. And even Japan, who is an American ally, people will focus on their military buildup, but they're still going along with Sakhalin Island, gas project. They have not fully sanctioned Russia because they can't afford to, and I have not seen America complain about it. So that's an interesting thing. In a way, this also reminds me of why is Australia becoming so draconian? Like, what are they really afraid of? In many ways, I think they're afraid of things going sideways, because the direction that America is taking is not going to stop. In many ways, it's their last chance to reverse the trend that the world has been on, particularly in 2022. And if that's the case, then maybe they're preparing for it. Maybe it's just you can look at them as upper management within the greater American empire, and after COVID, they just got used to that power of being to demonize. Because the thing is right, as long as they demonize the right, they shift the focus away from economic burdens that are affecting these countries, right? So they by amplifying some kind of a moral crusade,
that is threatening the entire system, they can afford not to be fiscally or economically responsible.
Oh yeah, 100%.
But I believe that is all I had for the year in review that I can at least put into a coherent sentence. And I think that if we were to truly do a breakdown year by year, we'd probably be here for about 12 hours, in which case, as much as I'd love to, I don't think any of us have the time to indulge such a project. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this year of the war report, I'll just say, and thank you to Geo for coming on and for becoming what is almost, and perhaps a few more appearances will solidify this, an integral part of this wonderful program of ours. We certainly do appreciate that. You've given a whole new life to it, and we look forward to having more of you on here. And if either of you have any final words for the year to our wonderful audience.
Buckle up, because I can't imagine 2023 being any less nail-biting and exasperating and uncertain as 2022.
Yeah. I think 2022 has started a huge number of trends. I think that people's brains have been broken by the COVID. I'm going to write about this in my New Year's address. People's brains have been broken by the COVIDian era. The whole summer of love post the pandemic world order never materialized for obvious reasons. And I think, to quote Nick Land, to go back to Nick Land again, once you start on an accelerative process, it's very difficult to get off of it. I feel that the whole turbo American thesis that a lot of people are sort of knee-jerk going back to because of various times where Russia's been unwilling to fully integrate the war into their consciousness. I think that will change. I think there's a very good reason why they want to slow grinding away at the Ukrainians. But I do think that certain military setbacks have sort of caused people to autistically go back into their, the American empire is going to reign for 1,000 years, if not more. I think that this year has been a challenge for the neoliberal end of history thesis. And I think how you can tell this, because in the middle of the year in the summer, Francis Fukuyama was gloating harder than ever. He was gloating with the force of 1,000 suns. And the more that Francis Fukuyama gloats that he's right, the more wrong he was. So that's a good indicator.
I mean, the Golden Arches theory was disproven, so anything's possible now.
Yeah. I think, to quote Tony Soprano, I got the reverse Midas touch. Everything I touch turns to shit. I think that 2023 would probably be more of the same. I don't have any major predictions besides that. I feel that the war will still continue way past August at least. I think that depending, if there is a massive mobilization in January and February, then the West is going to test itself in terms of its own military industrial complex and its ability, or lack thereof, in its ability to supply Ukraine. But I do feel that on the culture war front, things will probably get more intense as the 2024 election approaches. In Canada, I don't see very much changing unless there's an economic housing crisis and downturn. I think that Palavra, if that was the case, would be in a very good position to call an earlier election than anticipated. Not that he will. I think that Harper will basically start pissing in his ear at that point to say that give Trudeau enough rope to hang himself for the next 2 years. Fucking stupid meme, no, but I think that 2023, I want to be optimistic. I want to think people would wake up from the absolute nonsense. Of course, in internet time, now that I truly believe that 2022 was the first of a truly integrated, terminally online existence for most people after the COVIDian era. And that's a big basis of my New Year's address that I'm currently writing. I think that we will see more of the same as more Zoomers approach college level. That's going to be, a shift in tone as well in the discourse. But other than that, I don't know. I hope in 2023 is the year. I don't know. I get a
Yes,
GF maybe. Who
yes,
knows?
and of course the
Hopefully.
belated happy birthday to our good friend here. And I'll just cut
Yes,
to the
Oh
okay.
yeah.
chase.
Happy birthday.
Say, give this man your money. You know the drill. And I would have no other words to end this year of episodes with than it's Jover.
It's God bless. Goodbye. Patreon.com/Productions.
Very good. I will say for predictions, if there's going to be any kind of intervention, it's looking more and more like it will happen in Kosovo.
Oh, that's nothing we didn't talk about.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean Balkan war crimes again? Let's fucking go! No,
But
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I hope nothing happens.
Yeah, of course. But I think when the West isn't happy with the way things are going, they always try to beat up on Serbia, and there's many fronts that America would like Russia to get tied up in, and I think it's going to have a lot of consequences. If you believe the West is running out of ammunition, how well could it fight in Kosovo? On the other hand, I'm not one to assume that the Orthodox world in Europe will be very supportive of Serbia, not because the populations wouldn't be, but the political class would not. So yes, it's America's never been stronger, but it's come at the expense of Europe, and we'll see how well I can finance Europe.
Yeah,
because Ukraine is already a black hole. So,
do you have any predictions, Constantine?
Well, I have to co-sign the buckle up, and that I think we'll finally start to see the major cracks that formed this year start to come to some sort of fruition in 2023, and that we will see the actual results of what has been boiling since about 2019, 2020, 2021. Now, of course, it won't be the end of it all. It won't be the final results of it, but I think we'll see much more tangible results than we have seen in previous years. And that, yes, I think this war, if not ended soon, inevitably will have a second or a third front. Now, whether that be directly involving Russia or a situation like Kosovo, or maybe some sort of American attempt at a major regime change in Iran, who knows? But the longer this goes on, the greater likelihood that there will be some sort of expansion of this low boil global conflict that's going on currently. And that's really what I would tell you to keep your eye out for. And I'll say this much: I've harped on this in the show in the past, and I'll continue to do so. Take whatever actions you can within your personal life that are immediately available to you to prepare yourself for any sort of adverse situation. And again, that can apply to pretty much every aspect of your life, whether that be from your financial standpoint, whether that be from just your interpersonal relationships, your relationship with God, just anything really that might involve you and how you interact with the world, and solidify what you have and really prepare for things to start to go downhill rapidly. Not to be a fearmonger or a doomsayer or anything like that, but the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be. I'll just put it that way.
Mm.
Yeah, and
yeah, it's gonna get worse before it gets better. So,
do you think that as Western governments get more desperate, I mean, the reality of persecution is always there, but I feel like for now at least they've lost at least partially a huge node of their media power with Twitter, with the Heaven site.
Well,
but I mean that could change easily too.
To wed my optimism to my pessimism, I do believe attempts at repression will grow stronger, while said apparatuses to carry out the repression will grow weaker. And that will be our real saving grace, is incompetence and dysfunction of the system. And that's not for a lack of trying on the part of people who would like to see these sort of things implemented.
Yeah, I think that maybe it was an easier sell under Trump, but now it's not as much. I mean, the American racial politics. I feel like culture war will always perennially heat up nowadays. And I know, I forget who was talking about this. I think it was Patrick Casey and Nightmare Vision, that the possibility of a trans George Floyd, like if the cops against a trans person, that could spark something,
or anything that could be reasonably, and I use the word reasonably very loosely, construed as such, to the point where
same with Floyd, so.
any camera angles they can manipulate, anything they can do to try to start the I don't know, what would that be, round 6 of the civil rights movement? I'm losing track. Maybe we're up to lucky number 7 at this point, for all I know. But I agree with you. They're going to try to get some sort of push regarding the let's just say the T plus and the LGBTQ CIA thing, because of course we had America, of course, has its very diverse history with racial relations. It had its Stonewall moment. It had Obergefell. It had Roe. Now Roe is tentatively put on the back shelf, and the abortion question is wide up in the air. It really could go any way under the sun. But I agree with you, and something I have harped on for a while that I will continue to harp on is that we are one Obergefell away from the let's just say LGBTQ CIA stuff, with the T plus, let's just put it, holding the same sacrosanct place it does in American law that the rest of it does. So that's also something to watch out for.
Now,
go ahead.
Will there be the same degree of violence and rioting is yet to be determined.
Now, I think
to so happen in the summer.
Let's just put in YouTube friendly terms, due to, let's just say, the constituent population of said groups, I think with one of them you're always going to get a great degree more of an outburst like that. But I wouldn't put it past these let's just say very diverse individuals who like to experiment with societal expectations around a gender, so to speak. I think they have quite a bit of pent-up rage that can be expressed.
Oh yeah.
Now,
the conservative, the boomers are wrong about this.
Now I'm just imagining the It's Ma'am guy, like with a Molotov, and it's a horrifying mental image, and the Jessica Yaniv's the world that like storming the stage of Bernie Sanders and taking over his speech, and just a repeat of all the BLM stuff we saw, except just with a bunch of burly dudes in women's clothing, and it's I mean,
well, they're arming now the left activist groups. There's this gun club they have now.
The John Brown Society or whatever it is. That's been around for a few years now. But it's picking up steam. That all of a sudden they see the merits in civilian firearms ownership, and I'll just leave it at that to avoid any controversy with perhaps the algorithms or the.
But I think point being is that the boomers are wrong about this. The boomers have the boomer conservatives that watch the wall banger Sean Hannity. They have this fantasy that if there's ever a quote unquote civil disturbance, that's we're just gonna go over there, we're gonna own the libs in real life because we're big burly chuds. No, I mean,
I think it's gonna be a perpetual repeat of the 2017 clashes in Portland, where
it's it's one guy that's a casual bodybuilder against a sea of scrawny soy males. No, this isn't the case anymore. Those people will be equally armed, and maybe not equally, but I feel that they would pose a significant force. Of course, the problem is that they have the monopoly on violence because the state in a lot of these like liberal cities.
Oh yeah, the benefit of the doubt
yeah.
is going to be completely on their side. And I'll return. I know this was 2021, but I'll 2020, 2021. The Rittenhouse case being such an anomaly, and I do think that will give a lot of people false hope that, like, oh, hey, Kyle got off, but, you know, maybe I can, or maybe whoever else can, not realizing it's because you had this doofus 17-year-old half-Hispanic kid and not, like, a fully grown, physically imposing grown man who did it. And it really just came down to that. And just the amount of camera angles you had, it became... There was no way they could have even lied their way out of that one. And I do think, although I'm not saying it's it is a good thing that he got off, but I do think it's going to give a lot of people the wrong impression that they'll have the same outcome as him if put in a similar situation.
No, he won't. They won't let it happen again. That's like Trump. They won't let it happen again. They're still freaking out. There's still tweets that go viral about Kyle, like when he was a young kid, like taking gun lessons. Like, this is the real grooming radicalization of like middle conservative Ameritards.
Yeah, and growing up
teaching their kids about guns
in a similar environment.
They wouldn't let us burn down the city. It was horrible.
Yeah.
They protected their own property with guns. Oh my god.
Oh no, it was horrible. It was so oppressive.
Yeah, but growing up in a similar environment within like a 5-year age gap with Kyle Rittenhouse, just to give away some information about how old I may be and where I live, which I suppose you guys, a lot of you probably already knew that, but like, everything Rittenhouse did is, like, the kind of stuff me and my friends are going, like, yeah, people shoot guns out here. People, like, are, like, shadow a cop for career day and get to hang out in, like, the cornfield police station, get to wear the, doofy little police uniform. That was one of the other ones they kept throwing at him, like, ACAB, he wants to be a cop when he grows up, blah, 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 blah. But, yeah, it's...
This is how they radicalize you at the young age, the fascist white supremacist police in America.
If only. But point being is, I think we will, just in terms of predictions, get a lot more instances like that. And I think a lot of people who still have, for some reason, some modicum of faith in the system, in the process, will fall victim to this, thinking that they can be the exception too. So that's something to look out for. I'll say this. Being a hero in these times, unless it is somebody of blood relation, is not worth it. As much as I hate to say that, don't
do anything stupid.
Yeah, don't do anything stupid. Don't bring any unnecessary risk to yourself. Once again, unless it is for that blood kin or something approximating that. I'll just put it like that. And any actions you take, they're all on you. I have nothing to do with it. I don't even know who the hell you are. Just to get all the regular disclaimers out of the way, but...
Yeah, me too.
I suppose that's all I have.
I'm not affiliated with any group. I don't participate in any, like, rallies. I didn't even go to the trucker thing, because I knew that someone would photograph me or something. So please, don't make any mistakes out there. If you see one of the, let's call them Brahmin caste Americans or Canadians having a public moment and you feel compelled to do something about it, don't. Unless it's your kin or family, you're the one that's probably going to go to jail in that case. And you will have your life ruined, and journalists will come to your house and say, why are you such a racist? How dare you let the Brahmin caste American not do their thing? Yeah.
So, that reminds me. Just one last piece of advice I'll give you this year. Take every legal opportunity you can to get your neat bucks, okay? Every opportunity presented to you to where you can get free money from the government, whether that be state, federal, or local, apply for it, and get as much as you can from these people, because, now's the time for getting.
Yeah. Man. I was just going to say one last thing, and we didn't touch on Kanye. I bring it up. I bring it up because that Black-Jewish alliance really took a hit in 2022. And, first it was with Whoopi Goldberg and then with Kanye. But the funny thing is Whoopi Goldberg again reiterated that the killing of Jews in World War II was still not racially motivated. So,
whoa!
What
about that in 2022?
But so this
I
is
condemn
like,
these Schwarza. They're
this
way
is
out
from
of
a
line.
Breitbart article from today. So that's an alliance that is I'm sorry, I think it's disintegrating, and I think we're going to see in 2023 more of that.
Yeah, sorry.
Whatever people's opinions about Kanye may be.
Yeah.
I think that is damaged. It is damaged. They have overregulated. They have screwed the bolts of this thing so tightly that it has backfired on them. And we'll see in 2023, but in 2022, I think you can safely say that that alliance is damaged to some degree.
Yeah, the Schwarza got too uppity. That something had to be done about it.
What could repair that relationship?
Nothing. It's Jover. Okay, once again, to repeat those words, it's Jover.
Maybe if like some like crazy, like, you know, sleeper cell glow in the dark does something in public, who knows? But no, not even that. Like, I feel like that relationship, like it's gone.
The question is, how many more bucks have to be broken?
Going on, like, his name is Jay Blatz, or like in that rap show.
Oh,
he's like trying to be hip, but like the thing is though, like African Americans, they could see through that this guy's just trying to like, hello fellow kids, like it's like this doesn't work. No, we're gonna talk about race. We could talk about anti-Semitism. We talk about all sorts of good stuff on Jay Blatt here on what's the guy's name? It wasn't Vlad. It was Charlemagne the God. Yeah. We're gonna talk about all sorts of cool stuff. Like, it's what cool stuff? They don't want to hear this because basically you're browbeating them. You're saying that you're the ones that you fostered anti-Semitism in your community, and how dare you do that? So it doesn't. I mean, it works with white people, but it probably won't work.
No.
Yeah, maybe it won't work for white. Oh no, they're not saying. But it is quite funny though, like the outcome of it. Yeah. But I mean, who knows? Maybe it'll go away. I think probably there's some type of like glowing activity, like some kind of bioluminescence that are probably like pissing in Greenblatt's ear, saying like, listen, I know you're trying your best, but maybe you should, calm down a little bit because this isn't good. Like, it's,
Yeah.
But I gotta lecture them. What are you talking about? Like, listen, just trust us in this, okay? Listen. Do you want money for the missiles? Because we're gonna go to war with Iran soon. So, you're right. You need money for the missiles. See, I'm doing this when I did the stand-up. Sam Hoytel, do you remember? We need money for the missiles. Yeah. No, I don't think. Listen, I'm not saying any conspiracy theory here. I'm saying like his PR team probably said to him, listen, you got to tone down a little bit. This isn't good. Yeah. But it's anti-Italian discrimination. Nobody cares about that. It's late at night, bro.
That's the saddest word spoken on this show, and we've talked about a lot of sad things, but
I know.
I mean, that's all I had. This is the longest episode of the War Report on record. I'm very proud of that. It's the 3.5 hours I predicted, so thank you for bringing me over that finish line, both of you, and of course to our audience as well. And I will once again reiterate for the third time, just to make these the final words of 2022 coming from my mouth, it's Jover.
It's Jover.
God bless. Happy New Year.
And Take you,
care.
Ladies and gentlemen. Have a nice day and a nice new year. We will see you in 2023, and goodbye.